If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What's the strangest, scariest encounter you've had with the unexplained or unknown that left you questioning reality? And how has it shaped your beliefs?
In 2019, I was on a friend's 300-acre property in the middle of nowhere in Oregon. On the second day, as the sun began to set, all 6 of us sat on the benches around the fire pit, shooting crap, while 2 of my friends, who had brought their kids, were preparing s'mores. I felt really comfy in my fancy padded folding chair and just kind of zoned out looking into the forest. I was staring out into space a long time before I noticed one of the trees had a large hand grabbed around it. I froze, and my arms shot up with goosebumps, and I said too, "Let's call him Greg, but that's not his name. Look exactly where I'm pointing and focus on that tree, there's a hand." He didn't see it for a while, and I got frustrated, but then he said something like, "Holy SHT, there it is." It was big fingers wrapped around the tree, and they looked almost like tree bark, like imagine some really dark skin with small ridges and cracks that look very close to tree bark. But it was a huge hand. This was about 15 meters away. Both of us just stare at it, and it doesn't move for an out of 8 minutes, and suddenly its grip loosened and disappeared behind the tree. Me and Greg just look at each other dumbfounded and later walk up to the tree, and this tree is huge, like at least 2 feet in circumference, and this hand was holding it like a hammer. No imprints on the ground, no smell like if an animal had been there. There's something huge out there in the forests of Northeast Oregon, and it blends in well. I've had an experience that has stuck with me since childhood. Decades later, I still do not understand what it was that I encountered. I'd appreciate any opinions or insight that anyone can provide. As a child, I lived in a rural area on a quiet road that people sometimes walked on for exercise. One evening I was sitting on my front steps when someone/something walked down the road and turned into our driveway, about 100 yards from the road. As I said, I would often see neighbors walking, but no one walked to our house. What I saw is difficult to describe. It sounds silly, but the only way I can describe it is what I first thought was a person, walking, slinking, and having a face I can only describe as looking akin to the old SNL claymation character Mr. Bill, but with long teeth and a menacing grin and teeth too long for a person. Hard to believe, right? Aside from the looks and gait, the thing that sticks with me the most is that I couldn't move. It felt as though I was in a trance, fixated upon their face. I do not recall fear, only fascination and dread. I recall being cognizant of being unable to get up. It was still a ways off, but close enough to clearly see its face, when my dad called through the screen door for me to come in for supper. And like that, I was able to stand up and come inside. I shut the door, didn't look back, and didn't tell anyone. I remember thinking that no one would believe me and felt relief and safety. All of these years, I have never been able to forget this experience. I only wish I could understand what happened. The thing that keeps me from believing that it is a false memory is how the experience is burned into my brain with great detail. What on earth did I experience? Summer camp, 1992. I was 9 years old. This was in Texas. Hiding in the woods during capture of the flag, I was on the edge of this big, clear-cut high-voltage power line easement but still in the shadows. The moon was bright, and I could see what I thought was an older kid or maybe a counselor running at full speed through the moonlight. Not wanting to be seen, I crouched lower, and as this person approached, I could see they were very big. They appeared to be slightly larger than average. I got scared and hid my face, not wanting to look at them. As they passed me, they sounded like an animal. Like a bull, almost. Heavy footsteps and snorting. When it was past me, I looked up and could see the shadow. The head was elongated, even beyond the distortion the moonlight's angle was causing. It was taller and wider than it should have been. No idea who or what that was. This is pretty freaky. I still don't know how to explain it. About 2 years ago, my sister, her infant nephew, and I moved into an apartment that, we later discovered, was used as an elderly community. From the moment we moved in, we felt uneasy. The weird feeling wasn't enough to get us to ditch our seemingly awesome apartment, though. Especially not a cheap 2-bedroom that allowed dogs and had a pool. A few months after moving in, weird stuff started happening. Shadows moving in an otherwise still room, objects not being where they had been left, baby toys talking to themselves in dark rooms. Just the kind of thing to make your skin crawl. To make matters worse, even when it was bloody hot outside, my bedroom would be freezing, and the closet door was always broken in an open position. It didn't matter how often we would get it fixed, it would instantly be broken again. Now this is where it gets a little crazy. One morning I woke and my bed had been moved. I hadn't even as much wrinkled my sheets while sleeping, Yet my bed had been slid 3 feet away from the wall. I then began having pretty intense night terrors. I'd jump out of bed screaming and throwing my blankets, begging for my sister to save me. This would happen 3 times a night. One night I had a particularly vivid night terror, only I didn't feel frightened. I jumped up in bed, looked around, and saw eyes peering around my broken closet door. I leaned in and saw a man, mid-20s, staring back at me. I said in the calmest voice I could muster, "I'm going to give you a few minutes alone, but then you need to leave." I stumbled to the living room and sat on the couch for 10 minutes, then walked back to my bed. From that moment on, no more baby toys talked, my closet door closed with ease, and my bedroom was at a normal temperature. Around 5 years ago, I was trekking alone in Austria. I had a fantastic day walking and climbing up to the summits to enjoy the view. After some time, I had a feeling that I was not alone up there. After I had packed my things and began the journey back down to civilization, the feeling only grew. I began to feel really uneasy for no reasonable explanation. I walked downwards into the tree line, still with the same feeling I was being watched. All of a sudden I heard this loud ripping and snapping of big branches up ahead. I froze. The sound was very loud and about 50 years in front of me. I looked up and couldn't believe my eyes when I saw a large black shape glide through the treetop slowly, from left to right. It blocked the light of the sky and made no noise as it moved. It was very big, as big as a car in shape. My heart was banging away, and my legs felt like jelly. My eyes felt really wide, and my adrenaline was pumping. I stood still looking for this thing to return for 10 minutes or so. What could it have been? Surely not a climbing bear, not an eagle, or anything similar. Like I said, it was large. My options were limited. I had to decide what to do. What would you have done at this point? This is a true story that deeply scared me. Back when we were 18, I had a mate who reckoned he was getting haunted/stalked by this menacing black figure. I was kind of dubious. One night, I am staying at his parents' large, old wooden mansion. He gives me his parents' bed for the night. It was the perfect storm of creepiness. His stepmother had a massive porcelain doll collection facing the bed, and I hate those duckers. The family dog was an old Aussie sheepdog, but with full cloudy white cataracts covering his eyes, so he looked freaky as well. Old house, porcelain dolls, blind dog with white clouded eyes. Perfect. So after midnight sometime I wake up in his parents' bed. A ducking cold wind is blowing through the open door in a closed house. Also, I got a feeling of intense terror. To top it off, the dog is hiding under the bed and crying. The dog is my proof it wasn't just a nightmare. Then a big, black-robed figure coasts in through the door and hovers over the 4-poster beds. About 8 feet tall. Menacing, temp is icy cold, scared the shit out of me. It hovers for a few minutes while I try and wake up. Unfortunately, I am awake. Then I lie there dead, still too scared to move, while the dog whines under the bed. I am too scared to check on the dog because if it stares at me with those blind, cloudy white eyes, I will die. The dog was definitely scared as duck. It stayed under the bed whimpering. Once I gathered the courage, I went to my friend's room and told him what happened. He calmly answered, "Now you know what I go through every night," rolled over, and went back to sleep. Duck that man. He eventually got the church to do an exorcism, which apparently worked. That's my story, and it is true. When I was 16, I took a trip with my grandma during the summer to spend a week at my cousin's house. My cousin lived in an old house in an old mining town in the Sierra foothills near the California/Nevada border. They had talked about seeing someone in the dust of the driveway as they drove off and of seeing someone peek over the stairs while they were watching TV. I didn't think much of it. Then one of the mornings I was there that week, I woke up just as the sun was coming up and there was a man standing in the hallway. He was looking into the other room across the hall that my grandma and young, maybe 5 years old, cousin were sleeping in. He was covered in a dark blue light, and it looked like he was wearing a button-up shirt and jeans. I couldn't see his face because he was facing the other bedroom. There was also nothing below his knees. I could see the top of his head down to his knees. I assumed I was dreaming, so I closed my eyes hard and opened them, trying to wake up, but he was still there. Then I rubbed my eyes firmly with my hands, but he was still there. Finally, as I was staring at him, he just vanished. This entire time I wasn't afraid. I woke up my cousin that I was sharing the room with, and we got up for the day. I can't explain it, and I know I wasn't dreaming. Little girl at my in-laws' house. My in-laws live in a 3-bedroom ranch house. It is a rectangle shape, with the garage, my in-laws' room behind it, a hallway to the kitchen, a living room behind it, another living room next to the kitchen, 2 bedrooms across the second living room, and a bathroom at the end of the house with a full basement the length of the house. My in-laws were being foster parents to twin 13-year-old boys of a friend who had a severe accident and could no longer raise them. Since I got off of work at 1:30 p.m. and the boys got out of school at 3:30 p.m., I picked up the boys, made them dinner, and made sure they did their homework and chores before my in-laws got home. It was a Tuesday, about mid-September, still sunny, warm with a slight breeze, a nice early fall day in the Midwest. I walked in their house from the garage about 2 p.m. and stopped at the kitchen. The kitchen had a U-shape on one side and the sink/dishwasher against the exterior wall, just opposite. Normally, I am greeted by their dog at the garage door, which I hug and give treats to, but he was in the kitchen, in the corner of the U-shape. I saw his fur and ears moving like he was being petted. He was looking up with his tail straight, normally he wags. The whole house felt claustrophobic, and the air was still in the house. I didn't feel fearful, but I knew someone was next to me, by the dog. The dog came over by me, and I heard a little girl skipping and singing a nursery rhyme. I heard the nursery rhyme but can't place it. I could tell that it was right in front of me. I felt a wall form in front of me, and a strong gust of wind flew through the house. Cabinets opened, closed, and things fell off the shelves. The wind went right into the back bathroom and through the house, and then the house had a light and warm glow. My in-laws' house was built on the parking lot of a church, their neighbor's bathroom behind the back was built on the cemetery, and the children's clinic that had many unexplained events in the back of the house was built on the old church. I am not sure if this is related, but I was in my in-laws' basement, in the back corner, almost under the back bathroom, getting some food from the deep freezer. I felt that I was being watched, and I heard weird noises in the basement many times. I looked in the back corner from the floor, up about 2 feet, I saw a pitch black shadow darker than the surrounding shadows. I felt extremely cold and defensive. I left the basement and tried to avoid going there. This may sound weird, and to this day I still have no explanation as to how this happened. I live in a 36-story apartment building and was on my way to go to the mall. We live on the 30th floor. I get in the lift at floor 30 and press the ground button, floor G. When the lift opens at ground, I notice the whole foyer/lobby area is completely different. Different couches, lights, colors, etc. I was really taken back by it. I make my way to the exit, and after seeing the outside area and then looking back to the building entrance, I realize that the building isn't the one I live in. This building was in the same local area, not too far away from mine, but I have no explanation as to how or when I got there. This all happened while I was in the lift. I'm the kind of guy who is very skeptical and down to earth, but this still gets me. My unexplained story. This story has no explanation whatsoever, but to you it may seem unbelievable, but all I can say is we do not have a clue as to what happened. It was a few years ago. We had a barbecue that day with the family, and me and my husband were going camping the day after. We have 3 grown-up children and a small child, the smallest age gap being 16 years. The kids were not coming apart from the smallest, who was only about 3 or 4. Anyway, we left the kids and had a lovely holiday. Then a few weeks later my son, who was around 20 at the time, was looking through his phone when he came across a picture of him in bed, and it was of his back. He thought it was strange, and maybe his little sister had taken it, which he didn't think she had, but that is all he could believe of. He then began to look at when the picture had been taken, and it was the night before we had gone on holiday. When we had had the barbecue earlier on that day, he remembered that it was a really warm night and he had left his bedroom window wide open in his room, and the time it was taken was early hours in the morning. Also, his bedroom door was closed, and his handle from the door had come off, so he was unable to close the door without a lot of messing about to open it again, so he had been leaving it open. So if it was his little sister, she would not have been able to get out of his room that night. He is convinced that either someone climbed through his window that night and took a picture or this was something else. I really cannot see someone climbing through a window and taking a picture. This sounds the least unlikely to me. Anybody got any ideas? Living shadow with white eyes. This happened to me when I was 9 years old and living in my old house. I'm 23 now. At the time, I've lived in the house for about 4 years without anything happening to me. I'd hear unexplained creaks from the floor above me when the house was empty, and my late dog would have seemingly random fits barking at rooms no one was currently occupying. On to the incident. I was at home alone, taking a shower upstairs, which was relatively new for me since my room was on the first floor, and I honestly don't remember what compelled me to do so, but I did. After I was done taking the shower, I took a piss and washed my hands. Upon washing my hands, I felt a sharp chill on my shoulder and prayed, if not rationalized, that it was just the towel I had used to clean myself with. I turned to find the cause of it, a stoic, pitch black figure in the shape of a man. It had spikes like hair and white beads for eyes. It lacked any definable features and just stared at me for a couple of seconds. I stood in silence, not being able to muster a scream. I couldn't move, thinking it would kill me if I did. Moments later, it lifted its arms, resembling the cross, and I swear to everything it phased/flattened onto my door and slid out like some sort of demonic flying cockroach sticker. To this day, I don't know what it wanted from me or why it bothered to touch me only to flee. Only after we moved out did my family let me know that the previous tenants of the house were murdered. There was a wife and a husband. One day the husband came home early from work and caught his wife with another man. He then shot the man, who fell from the second floor, probably in an attempt to escape. The husband killed himself afterwards. The murder happened on the second floor in the room next to the bathroom, so I can only now assume that the ghost I saw was the husband who killed himself. The event itself has now become something of a fond memory, and I'd tell any friend who asks or if it's relevant, and I just felt like sharing it today. I still want to know what he was looking for when he came to me, but this is the type of closure you never get to come to terms with. Oddly enough, this event hasn't made me religious, but I can't deny the validity of the spiritual. I'm a non-believer in anything supernatural or paranormal, but none of my family is. A lot of their stories I chalk up to sleep paralysis, etc., but this one is my mother's, and as far as how it plays out in my head, I cannot think of an explanation. When she was like 13 or 14, she lived in Thailand with her family. They lived in an apartment building on the 7th or 8th floor. She was playing a Ouija board with her brother and 2 other Americans in the evening, so the sun was still out and there were people walking on the streets near her building. Obviously, people start asking about ghosts, demons, and what have you. After a while of scaring themselves, a glowing red orb, like some kind of entity, floats in through the 7th story window, hovers in the middle of the room for half a minute or so, and then disappears entirely. All of them shit their pants and ran out of the room to where the adults were, and the adults sensed nothing and thought they were lying. To this day, more than 40 years later, neither of them relent about what they saw. I see my uncle regularly, and he has the same story as my mother. It makes no sense to me, but I simply can't believe it was a demon or Satan or some stupid shit like that, but I can't think of any rational idea for what would cause something like that. Strange encounter in South Central Wisconsin. The weekend of October 11th, my friends and I set out for a camping trip in Lake Kegunsa State Park located in Stoughton, Wisconsin. While finishing up some geocaching on a hiking trail near the outhouses, we encountered something/someone strange. You can enter the trail after crossing the path of another trail that enters the forest. The trail we were on circled a prairie that lay in the middle of it and was surrounded by forest. The sun was low in the sky. It had to have been roughly 6 p.m. The sun was just above the tree line as we started our hike. As we were at our last geocache of the night, the sun had just gone behind the tree line, and it was beginning to get dark. But we could still see without the assistance of flashlights. The forest went silent. No more sounds of the bugs around us or birds that have been active all day. It approached us with a whistle, a bone-chilling whistle. Our entire group went silent, and no one said a word until we heard a second whistle. This second whistle was more broken up than the first, and in the slightly tipsy state I was in, I thought it had to be a human whistle as it was not perfect. To that I responded with a pretty stern hello, hoping for an explanation as to why our group got whistled at twice. "I thought you were dogs," a voice said as it rounded the trail towards up. As he passed our group, I noticed I could not make a face out on this person, but chalked it up to nerves and being distracted. As a group, we agreed that while it was a strange encounter, we should not panic but take it as a sign to get off the trail. This is where it gets even more weird. All 4 of us in the group kept our eyes peeled for anything as we made our way back to the car. When suddenly, this creature, calling it a creature as it surely was not human, unexpectedly appeared on the edge of the trail closest to the woods. Staring blankly at the field in front of it, that would have been to our right. And in the flattest, driest tone, it said, "Who's that guy?" Everyone in our group kept walking as I answered, "The same guy from earlier?" As I assumed it was talking about my boyfriend, who was behind the group. We had never been so silent on the walk back to the car. Checking behind our shoulders and our surroundings constantly. We made it back to our campsite, where we decided, due to the time of the day, it would be best to wait to pack up until morning. While we were debriefing our experience, I told my friends how in neither encounter I could not make out a face. Being a female hiker, I make a point to gather some facial features of anyone I cross on the trail as a just in case. No one in our group could identify a face. And in our own ways, we described how the face on this thing was not a human face. It seemed to almost have a blurred effect over what should have been a human face. All of us saw the same thing. You could tell where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. But there was none on this creature. Being that it whistled and was unidentifiable, we are convinced to have encountered a skinwalker. They just are not relevant in that area of Wisconsin. It was a long night at the campsite with the impending feeling of being watched. I'm spiritually inclined and feel I took the necessary steps of protecting our campsite for a secured night's sleep. But I have had strange encounters since. Any ideas? The Bag Lady. In high school, during a quiet summer night, me and two friends went to investigate a local ghost road. It was rumored to have a ghost lady who would appear carrying a couple of bags and then dematerialize in front of you. The road has fields, woods, and houses spread out, but by no means did it feel remote or creepy during the day. We pulled the little pickup truck to the side of the road, turned the engine off, and just sat quietly with the windows down. The cool night air felt perfect. We were still talking like normal about life and girlfriends and really just half paying attention to the dark road that stretches out away from us. Then I saw something. Here's what I saw. During a lull in conversation, I looked up to see the silhouette of a 3-4 tall humanoid shadow walking down the opposite side of the street, no more than 40 feet away. I didn't say anything but started in disbelief. It looked like a Muppet had been walking. No sooner than I saw this thing, it walked through a darker shadow cast by a nearby tree in the moonlight and emerged out the other end of the shadow looking like a normal house cat. It was no longer upright, but was distinctly a cat. It walked a few more steps, looked at us, and silently bound over the guardrail and into the woods directly opposite us. From the small, weird 2-foot walker to the cat over the guardrail, it probably only took no more than 5 seconds in total. I said nothing the entire time. Strangely, nobody did. Then the driver said to nobody in particular, "Oh, it's just a cat." I said to him, "Why the confusion? What did you see?" And he said, "I thought it was a small person at first, but it was just a cat." I said, "Wait. I saw the small person too." We just looked at each other, took the cue, and headed home. This was almost 30 years ago now. The area has gotten substantially more built up with new homes and such. I think about this from time to time. I wonder if it was my eyes playing tricks on me, but it is noteworthy that somebody else in the vehicle saw the same thing at the same time. I used to live in Arizona, near a mountain sacred to the Native American tribes in the area, Pima/Maricopa. Rumors of skinwalkers were widespread in the area. My friends and I loved camping and were lucky enough to get permission to use a site near the mountain along the Salt River for a weekend. The first thing you have to understand is that we were a pretty sheltered group of kids. We didn't consume drugs and alcohol in moderation. We mostly went out to share creepy stories around the campfire and nerd out for a night or two. We all spent a lot of time in the desert and were all familiar with the land and wildlife, even the rarer species. We were sitting around our fire, listening to the river and the animal sounds around us. Crickets, cicadas, and birds. The moon was almost full, and the desert was beautiful. Suddenly, everything goes quiet. Only the sound of the river remains, and even that seems eerie. The air grew still and seemed to get cold. We hear rustling in the undergrowth across from our fire. Out steps a javelina. Javelinas belong to the pig family and typically have a brownish color, with the largest ones being about the size of a medium-sized dog. They're actually kind of cute. This one wasn't. It was huge and looked jet black, with glowing red eyes. It paced around a bit. It seemed like it was moving around the fire so it could look each one of us in the eye. I have never seen anything look at me like that, and I work with psych patients. Its gaze was cold and searching, like it could see through me. After what seemed like an eternity, it finally made its way back through the undergrowth. The night got warmer, and the normal sounds started up again. We spent the rest of the night very close to the fires, and GTFO'd as soon as the sun rose. I really want to believe it was just a male javelina scoping out some territory. But every instinct I have says it wasn't. Unknown creature sighting in the waters off Sweden. In 2015, I was on a boat traveling from Sweden to Estonia with my family. It is a small cruise ship, with maybe 100 people on board. I get pretty claustrophobic in tight quarters with a lot of people, so I tried to stay on the deck as much as I could. It helped that the views we passed as we sailed were incredible. Small islands with little cottages, deep blue waters, and a clear sky. I enjoyed standing by the rail of the ship and looking around, which is how I saw the thing. I heard a sound from below me, near the water. I don't know what the sound was, I can't recall, but I looked down anyway. 4 long, thin horns? Spires? Spikes? Think of a sail, long, thin, and slightly curved, that was sticking directly out of the water in front of me. They were easily 4 feet long from the top of the water, where I assumed the base was to the tapered tips that stood in the air. At first, I thought maybe it was the remnants of something that had sank. But it moved with the boat. It had a motion like a swimming shark, slightly side to side, and it swam directly beside the boat for at least a minute. Then it dove down, the sails disappearing under the water, like how a whale dives down after surfacing. The sabers were positioned as if they were the points of a regular diamond/rhombus. Each one was about 3 feet away from the other, so this thing was massive. I have researched fish and animals that live in those waters and can't find anything that matches what I saw. No one else saw it to my knowledge, or if they did, they kept it to themselves like I did. A weird recurring encounter. I don't know if this is the place for this, but I thought, what the hell? Another person's perspective might help me figure out what the hell is going on. This began when I was a kid. I forgot how the conversation started, but basically my grandmother told me that when my grandfather was a young man, he was dragged by the devil across his village and survived. He had 3 claw marks going down from each shoulder meeting in the middle of his lower back. He said that ever since, he saw a shadow of a man looking over him as he slept. A few days before he passed away, he said he finally saw the shadow again after not seeing it for years. About 2 years later, my younger cousin saw a shadow of a man looking over him, and he passed away in the hospital after a few weeks. About 3 years after that, my grandmother saw the shadow looking over her as she slept and passed away a few days later. This was all family from my mother's side. After my grandmother passed, I went to her house for a few weeks since I practically grew up there. On my 5th day, I was sleeping in my grandfather's old bedroom. And I thought I saw someone walking past the door, and I figured it was my uncle since I could see their shadow in the moonlight, but then I remembered I was alone that night in the house since my uncle spent the night at his work. I had a very unpleasant feeling, and I tried to get up, but I couldn't move from the bed. Suddenly I saw a shadow of what appeared to be a woman at the foot of the bed. Keep in mind I couldn't yell or move, and I was freaking the hell out at this point. I closed my eyes and tried to calm myself down, thinking I probably had sleep paralysis and was hallucinating. But then I felt weight near my legs. Being stupid, I opened my eyes and saw that the shadow of the woman was on all fours and getting closer to me. As she moved, I felt a tremendous amount of weight on my body. She got close enough to me that my nose could probably touch hers if she had one. All I saw were eyes like spiders, sort of like tarantula eyes, and nothing else. The weight was unbearable, and my chest began to hurt. Next thing I know, it's morning. This happened about 2019, and recently I've started to see a shadow of a man looking over me as I sleep, and I have no idea what to do about it. Honestly, I don't know if I should be freaking out, or maybe the experience I had screwed with my head a little. Any tips would help at this point. It's been happening more frequently. Years ago, my friend Lisa and I were driving back into the US. We had spent a week wandering and camping in Canada. We're both female, by the way. Being 20 years old, we had scarcely any money, and we had just spent the last of it on gas, so we needed to make it home. We drove late into the night. By 1 a.m., we still had a few hours to go. We were traveling south on Route 84 to Moline, Illinois. Lisa was driving, and we were having a great time. We chatted up a storm as we made our way down that little 2-lane highway. It's probably a scenic road by day. But at night everything was pitch black. Suddenly, a shape appeared at the very edge of our headlights. It looked like a log was lying in the opposite lane. As we got closer, the log turned out to be the legs of a man sitting on the highway. As we got even closer, we could see that the man was sitting on the solid white line of the opposite lane. His legs were jutting straight out onto the highway and would have been run over if a car had been coming from the other direction. We slowed down. Lisa started to swerve toward him. We said a few things like, "I wonder if he needs help and I wonder what he's doing out here in the middle of nowhere." The headlights completely illuminated him as we drove towards him. He sat facing the opposite side of the road, so we were looking at him in profile. He was wearing a brown suit, brown shoes, and a brown hat. His arms hung down by his sides. At first, he did not move or acknowledge us in any way. We stared at him in silence. Suddenly, he jerked his face toward us. His eyes were glowing red. His mouth opened and twisted into a snarl. We were completely terrified. To Lisa's credit, she reacted quickly by swerving away from him, punching the gas, and making a getaway as fast as she could. As we sped away, we both turned to look out the back window, but neither of us could see anything in the darkness. We couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness. It felt like we had stumbled across something we weren't supposed to see. It looked and dressed like a man, but those glowing red eyes were not human. Not my story, but was told to me. Okay, this local couple in my town had this experience. They were coming back from the city, an 8-hour drive north to my town, when they turned off the main highway going north and started heading down my town's only gravel road at 1 a.m., when they passed this person walking along the road going into town. The husband slows down, stops, then reverses to the person he just passed, going 110 kilometers per hour. He sees the person in the rear lights of his 4-door truck walking up to it. They unlock the doors to let him on. The person jumps in the back seat of the passenger side behind the wife. The husband asks, "Where are you going?" No answer at all from the person. Okay, so he drives another 5 minutes when, out of nowhere, this thing in the back seat starts making a noise like throat singing but only stuck on one note. The husband asks it to stop, but it just slams on the brakes and yells at it, "Get the duck out now." The thing keeps making the noise, and the only thing the husband could see of it is its mouth hanging open, still making the noise but not looking up at him, keeping its chin to its chest. Anyway, the thing opened the door and slid out onto its feet. As soon as its ass is out the door, the husband guns the engine spinning dirt and gravel. The wife is sitting there in the front and is thinking about that thing they just dropped off and is also a bit scared. When she looks in the side mirror and sees the thing keeping up with them, the wife screams at, the husband to speed up. The husband looks out her side mirror and sees the thing also keeping up with them. He goes up to 160 km/h when he loses sight of the thing chasing them and keeps going like that till they make it home. The wife tells her mother, who promptly organized gospel/prayer meeting night at their house the next evening and blessed them both in the house and the grounds around the house, the truck, hell even down the riverside and road leading to their house. He tells me it was a spirit they picked up that night. This doesn't directly apply to me, but it's still relevant. There was this guy who I used to work with, called Dan. Dan was a chill guy who everyone got on with, but a little bit weird at times. He used to believe in a lot of things, aliens, ghosts, government experiments, the lot. He wasn't religious, but that's besides the point. Anyway, while messing around at work, he's explaining stupid things to us. About how he's seen spaceships and how all this paranormal stuff happens when he's at home. Some of it is quite ridiculous, but I listen anyway. A couple of weeks later, he invites me around for a few beers. I was driving, so I couldn't really drink, but I still went over. We get onto the subject of ghosts, and he starts explaining things to me, like how he was once eating an apple and it exploded just as he went to take a bite. I laughed it off and thought it could have just been some sort of pressure with the way he was holding it causing it to explode. He was deadly serious about this. He pulled out a few pictures of this apple and started showing me the damage it had done to him. There was a picture of him with a cut on his cheek caused by this apple. However, I was still not convinced of this ghost he had in his house. He was not messing around. He said, "Hold on, actually, I'll show you." He pulls out this shoebox, full of pictures from around the house. He says, "Just flick through those, you'll see." I sigh and say, "Okay." I'm going through these photos of a recent Christmas. The usual photos. Kids opening presents, the family having Christmas dinner, having a few drinks at night, a group shot. I stop. This was the photo that left me in awe. His family was standing in front of this mirror, and in the reflection of the mirror was an Edwardian girl, smiling straight at the camera. This was not one of those could be a smudge types of things. It was not a hidden behind someone / can barely make it out type of thing, either. No. This was a clearly colored photograph, with the girl's reflection being black and white. You could make out her face, her smile, her clothes, her hands. Everything. It doesn't end there, though. Dan says to me, "I told you I wasn't shitting you." I go to the next photo. Same sort of thing. Family members have moved around, and so has the girl. She's doing a different pose. She's smiling, showing her teeth. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was this black and white girl. Standing right in the mirror, smiling at me. Like she'd be there the whole time. I felt like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice cold water over me. Like I was being watched. Like I wasn't welcome anymore, and I felt like I needed to leave. I put the photos back in the box, and not long after, left. I still don't believe in ghosts, aliens, or anything in that matter. But I know what I saw, and I know it scared the shit out of me. This encounter happened about 12 years ago but still makes me feel incredibly uneasy. At the time, I lived in our family home with my parents and 2 brothers. I had a lot of very strange and unexplainable things happen in this house, but this was by far the strangest. The house was 3 stories, and the attic had been converted into my brother's bedroom. I came out of the bathroom on the 2nd floor to see a figure rush past and run up the stairs to the attic. On the way, we had some boxes stacked up that had been knocked over in the rush. I walked straight to the boxes to stack them back up, and as I did, I looked up the attic stairs to find someone standing there. The staircase was dark, but I could clearly see one of my brothers standing a few steps up. At the time, my brothers looked very similar, same hairstyle, same build, same height, so it was really hard to determine which one of them it was. For a few seconds, we just stood and stared at each other in silence. Before my eyes could adjust to the dark to see who it was, he ran further up the stairs and into the bedroom. I heard his feet hitting the ground all the way upstairs, which made me feel uneasy as they didn't sound familiar. My brothers both have very distinctive footsteps, so I could always tell who was coming before even seeing them. I didn't really question what had happened, but something just didn't feel right. I had this chill running through me and a sinking feeling in my stomach. I made my way downstairs, and all I could think was, which one of them is wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt today? As that is distinctively what I saw him wearing. I got downstairs and peered into the kitchen. My stomach dropped. Our entire household was in the kitchen. Both of my brothers were there, both wearing shorts and colorful t-shirts. There was no one else in the house. It's not just the fact that I saw someone, but I heard them. I can't describe it, but I literally felt their presence. Why did it look like my siblings? Why did it stop to stare at me and then run away? Did it want me to follow it? What would have happened if I did? Unknown demon. True story. My paranormal event took place when I was 18 and living in Northern California. It was around 10 p.m., and everyone had just gone to bed. I was sitting at the dining room table, turning away from the window that faced the street. I had decided to stay up a bit to curl my hair. As I'm brushing my hair, I start to hear tapping on the glass window behind me. It's the same sound when you tap the glass with your fingernail. I wasn't sure what was going on, so I stopped to listen. Fear started creeping up into my thoughts. I kept repeating to myself, "Don't look in the mirror, don't look in the mirror." I sat paralyzed with fear, not sure of what to do. I knew it was not going to be good. I knew someone or something was trying to get my attention. I instinctively knew if I looked into the mirror, I was going to be horrified. I wasn't able to move or call out to my parents. I just sat like this for a while. The tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. Whatever it was, I knew it was trying to get my attention. Eventually, curiosity got the best of me. I looked into the mirror and saw the devil. Deep red, fleshy face, green eyes, horns. For a quick second, we locked eyes. I quickly reacted by screaming and jumping out of the chair. Everything went flying across the room. As I got to my parents' room, I noticed their door closed. If you grew up in the 70s, you didn't dare barge into your parents' room. I proceed to bang on their door, screaming, "Open the door." At that point, everyone had heard my screams and came running out of their rooms. I stood there shaking and crying out that I had seen the devil. My dad grabbed a bat and ran out the front door. I waited in the house with the rest of the family. 10 minutes later, my dad returns, unable to find anything. I was hysterical, there was no way to calm me down. My dad finally gave me a shot of tequila, and it seemed to help. After my younger siblings went to bed, I then told my parents what had happened. They believed that I saw something but thought it was the crazy neighbor's son messing with me. I know for a fact it wasn't human. I don't think I slept that night or the next. I will never, ever forget that face. I know for certain there are things out in this world that can't be explained. Most people will live their entire lives never experiencing anything like this. Believe me, I wish it had never happened to me. It is forever ingrained into my memory. Thankfully, I have never seen the demon again. In the 1980s I was in the Girl Scouts and we went on a camping trip near St. Augustine, Florida, and my mom was a chaperone. Our car died when we were about to head home, so the girls who went with us squeezed into other cars, and my mom and I took our car to a mechanic in St. Augustine. It would be a day before it was fixed, so Mom and I explored the town. I've always liked old, spooky places, so I loved the town. We went to a few tourist spots that were up my alley as far as creepy and old stuff went. One place we were on a tour with a small group as the tour guide told us about the place. I remember it being a house of some kind. Being a curious little shit, I left the tour and went down the hall and peeked into the first bedroom I came across. Alone in this room full of antique furniture, I looked around at everything. A painting on the wall fascinated me. It was a painting of a dark-haired family who looked quite sinister. How thrilling. I exited the room and caught up with the tour to tell my mom about it, wanting to show her. My mom indulged me and left the tour with me. We went down the hall and turned left into the same bedroom. But it wasn't the same bedroom. There was an antique bed, dresser, and wash basin, all the same types of furniture as before, but it was different. The bedspread was different, and there was one of those no-touchy ropes around the bed where there wasn't before. And there was no painting. We went back to the tour, and I was so distressed about that room that after the tour, my mom asked the guide about the room I saw, and he went to every room with us, trying to help find it. But we never did. Fast forward to the mid-2000s. My mom's cousin had moved to Florida, and we went to visit her, deciding to meet in St. Augustine as it wasn't far from where the cousin lived. We were on a mission to find the place I had this experience with the vanishing room. I swore it was in a house marketed as the oldest house in Florida, so we went there. But there were no hallways, and no rooms in it resembled the room I saw. I was perplexed. What other place would we have visited that was a tourist popular old house if it wasn't this one? I still don't know, and I live a couple states away from Florida, so until I can travel there I can't look into it further. Me and my friend encountered an unknown being. Not sure if this belongs here or not, but I assume this seems to be the place for it at the moment. So me and my friend believe we've encountered something truly weird, and we've both been shaken up. For context, this happened today at 6 p.m., and it's pretty much dark at this point in England due to it being close to winter. I'll call my friend C in this for anonymous reasons. Me and C walked uphill with our torches on so we could see more in front of us and keep an eye on our dogs. We reached this part we call the mixed view, which is one of those historical points you find in a park with information and history engraved on stone. There are benches, and we finally sat down after being lost for an hour, and it seemed like nobody was there, so we let our dogs have a sniff around and began to sit and relax for a moment. As we began to sit, we saw what appeared to be a really tall human figure standing not too far from us, shining a light on us with small red bits shining. We thought it might have been the park groundskeeper coming up to check we were okay. But all this thing did was stand there, not moving, with a light shining on us. C looked at me uncomfortably at this point, and I felt quite unsettled, so we decided to whisper because we were pretty much frozen. My dog didn't even approach it, and my dog usually approaches everyone and anything and is very friendly, but his heckles were up his ears and tail pointed, and he would not take his eyes off this thing. I tried to call him as he wasn't too far in front of me and he wouldn't come to me. He stood there frozen too. C's dog also adopted the same stance, refusing to shift his gaze away. I know for a fact that if my dog is behaving like that, it's usually a bad sign, so I whispered to C to move away and go back to the entrance, which was a mile away. She agreed, so we slowly got up and walked backwards. This thing starts to move towards us after standing there for a good 5 minutes, and we both instinctively started fast walking. This tall figured thing with a light still shining starts to go into a jog, so me and C started running. We ran for half a mile. I don't think I've even run that fast since the bleep test in school. We finally looked back to see if it caught up with us after going a different route, and luckily we escaped what could have been bad. It's really bugging me as I can't figure out what that thing was because we shined a light on it, but all we could see was a tall, dark figure, and our torches are strong enough to make out who would be behind a smaller light. It was approximately 6 feet 9 to 7 feet, had no facial features, seemed to have no outline of any clothes, was very slender, and had shining tiny red lights appearing every now and then on the body. It didn't speak or make any noise, its sole activity was to gaze at us for a duration of 5 minutes. Any of you guys got an idea of what this could be? Adaptive stalker and blue light from unknown origin. I believe something has been stalking me. I believe it is mostly active at night and a little active at daytime. The first time I started to think that something was stalking me was when I was taking out the trash at night, and I heard paced breathing above me in the trees, like in hide and go seek, where you would pace your breathing while trying to breathe quieter to not be heard. I held my breath to see if it was me, and I still heard the breathing. There were no animals around me, so I wasn't getting it confused for an animal. I acted like I didn't notice to prevent whatever it was from finding out that I knew it was watching me. I thought if it knew that I could tell it was watching me, then it would be a no witnesses left behind situation and it would attack me. Then, another night I was washing my hands in the kitchen from using the restroom. There is a window in front of the kitchen sink that I was looking out of. I suddenly got a very strong feeling of dread, and I had an instinct to get away from all windows and darkness. It was like my instincts were saying that there was something outside that I did not want to get to know better, metaphorically speaking, of course. Last night it got much more active than usual. I was washing my hands in the kitchen again like a dumb SS, and I got the exact same feeling and tried to get away. The only thing that was different is that I felt very compelled to look out the window, and that dread feeling was a little less intense. I was able to easily avoid looking at the window at first, but then my head was forced to turn, and I almost looked directly out the window. Out of the corner of my eye, I did see a light reflecting on a surface that was not there before. I went to my room, and I heard footsteps on my porch and some heavy breathing after about 10 to 15 minutes. I checked this morning for the same surface the light was reflecting on, and there is nothing outside of the kitchen window. My dogs would also bark out the window during the day, but there was nothing there that I could see. Also, I should mention that about a month ago, I saw something white run by my window. A few nights ago, I saw something white run across my room to hide while opening my bedroom door. That one might have been the door, since the door is also the color white. If there is some type of creature stalking me, then I believe that it is intelligent, adaptive, strategic, and methodical. I would love to receive some information or theories about what this might be. All help and suggestions are very appreciated. I hope that I reach some clarity about this situation. Also, this is probably unrelated, but at night I would go to the same window and there would be a blue light outside. It had no way of being there. I couldn't find any blue light bulb or any place for light to come from. I believe it's gone now. I am unsure of how long it has been since that blue light has appeared. Are those aliens, some type of entity, or something along the lines of that? I was working as a radiologic technologist in hospitals for many years and have several experiences. In 2000, during my first X-ray job right out of school, I went with another tech and a transporter to the 10th floor of the hospital for a short break, which was vacant and being renovated. We liked to put our lunches in the refrigerator there because one of our co-workers was taking our stuff out of the one in the radiology department. We had been chatting and laughing in the elevator, but as soon as the doors opened on 10, we all heard screaming coming from the far end of the unit. Not even thinking anything paranormal, we were concerned maybe a patient or visitor got lost up there and was hurt, so we all just took off running toward the screaming without hesitation, calling out to say we were coming. We could tell the screaming was coming from one of two rooms at the end of the hall, but when we approached the doorway, the screaming stopped. We each separated to look in the adjacent rooms but couldn't find anyone. We kind of looked at one another, and we all had huge eyes. I definitely had some goosebumps by then, and we decided to leave after quickly grabbing our lunches out of the refrigerator in the break room there. As we turned the corner back toward the elevator, we heard a loud metal sound, and we all turned around to see a wheelchair rolling down the hallway we had just come from, and it rolled right into one of the rooms at the end we thought the screaming was coming from. We left very quickly. I don't know what happened, but I know at least what happened to me. It happened in college, conveniently right near Halloween. My friends at the time were quite diverse in our religious beliefs, and it being All Hallows Eve, my Wicca friend wanted to show us all his beliefs. I enjoy the paranormal, I always have. As a man of science, I enjoy trying to explain the explainable. Mostly I enjoy the psychology of it, watching out brains trying to piece together things it wants to believe. The subconscious grasping at fragments of reality resulting in a psychosomatic hallucination. He said he wanted to try to summon something. He said to trust him, and trying to remain skeptical, we indulged his request. He lit candles and turned off the lights as we formed a circle around candles. We sat down and held hands as my friend bowed his head and began humming. He kept humming his ohm as we all closed our eyes. Suddenly an image of a cottage appeared in my head. It was surreal and so clear. I could feel myself there. I was in a calm grass field. I was standing just at the forest edge when I slowly walked up the path to the cottage. It had 2 floors and was a natural wooden brown. I looked over and saw the window near the door was shattered, when suddenly, my girlfriend at the time screamed. She got up and ran out of the room. Another one of my friends jolted back and yelled, "Oh God, what did I see?" He then starts frantically talking about how he saw himself as a wolf. He then starts talking about the details. He was in a field. He ran towards a house. It was what I saw, everything. It wasn't just some vague details but everything, from the field to the colors. Everything. I asked about the windows because I remember one was broken. He said he saw himself jumping through it. We stared at each other and knew. We saw the same thing. We heard my girlfriend scream again, and we ran out of the room to check on her. She is cowering in a corner, crying. She is hysterical and won't stop crying about her children. She doesn't have any children. She is in tears, crying out for them, for children she doesn't have. We try to calm her down, but we can't. We ask him what happened when she says, "The dogs got them. They attacked them. Oh God, the blood." We tried to calm her down, but she kept crying until slowly we all became very silent. What she was describing was what we all saw, and we just sat in silence. This story is the only time I've ever experienced something unexplainable and had another person there to back me up so I didn't feel crazy. The fact that it was my girlfriend, who would take the first chance she gets to call me crazy, and she confirms what we saw really drives it home. Me and her would occasionally go outside to look at the stars, and on this particular night instead of driving out somewhere, we were lazy and just laid on a blanket on my back patio in southern Pennsylvania. The night was super clear, and it was during the summer. As usual, we were there for like an hour and didn't see any shooting stars. Then this one light appeared. In the night sky, it looked about the size and brightness of a star, maybe slightly bigger like when you can see a planet. It was more orangey/yellow than the typical white star. Whatever it was very far away. At first I thought we had finally seen a shooting star and were good to go back inside satisfied because the bugs were starting to bite. Now imagine lying on your back. It started from behind the dogwood tree by my patio in my upper left field of view. My feet were facing away from the house, and I would have to tilt my head back looking upside down at the house to see it. From there, it moved slowly to the center of the sky. Then it stopped. A dead stop. Changed direction and at a breakneck speed and went across the dome of the sky toward the horizon back behind the dogwood. We each said nothing. Seconds later it was back, moving crazy fast. Stopped cold again. Made a 90-degree turn. Went very slowly. Accelerated insanely fast. Stopped. It just kept doing this in random combinations. It moved so unnaturally. The sudden, extreme changes in speed and direction scared me. There is nothing on Earth that moves like that. It wasn't a firefly or a bug in our face or a searchlight, it was too irregular. It was up there with the stars. It ripped across the dome of the sky toward varying points on the horizon, would be out of sight for a while, and then came back. It just kept coming back. Finally, we broke the silence. We turned to each other wide-eyed, and I said something along the lines of, do you see this shit? She just replied, yeah. Wanna go inside? To which I replied yes, and we spent the rest of the night racking our brains as to what the duck we saw. For the record, neither of us were under any influence, nor have we ever been. We saw this light. It was there. And it was way up there. If you saw the perspective of how far away it was and how unrealistically it moved around, it would send chills down your spine like the ones I get from typing this out. I hear lots of stories about lights. Has anyone seen something like this? This happened to my friends and me one year when we were in high school. We were all 17 years old and bored. We'd play video games a lot, but sometimes we'd just go driving around. The town we lived in wasn't really big, and it was surrounded by country roads. Those were the best roads to be on. No cops, nobody around, just us in my friend Drew's truck playing loud music. One night we were on one of these country roads when off in the distance we could see that someone was standing there in the middle of the road. Drew slowed down. The guy in the road didn't move, so Drew pulled his truck to a complete stop. Now this is a pitch black night, so we couldn't see much, and the guy was just outside of the headlights. But we could tell he was still standing there and was facing us. Now we were three regular-sized guys. We shouldn't be too freaked out by one guy in the middle of the road, but you never know who might be out there. I mean, who stands in the middle of a dirt road in the middle of the night? So, we're sitting there, with the truck idling. Just go on and go around him, some of us say. But really, this is getting creepy. Suddenly, the guy takes a step towards us, drops down on all fours, and starts running towards our truck. Man, we all freak and start shouting at Drew, "Go back! Go back!" Drew throws the truck in reverse and slams on the gas. We're all screaming, and we can still see this thing running towards us on all fours, like an animal or something. I swear to God we drove for at least 2 miles like that, high speed and in reverse. Finally, the object is no longer visible. Drew swings the truck around, and we speed back to my house. We run up to my room, shut the door, and spend the rest of that night and many more nights wondering what in the hell that was. It was Christmas Eve, and I was lying in bed, super excited about Christmas and thinking about all the cool stuff I asked for on my list. It must have been around midnight or so, an anxious 8-year-old trying to get myself to fall asleep so that Santa wouldn't get mad at me and give me coal instead. I had my blankets covering me all the way up to my chin and wrapped around me like a cocoon. It was dead silent in the house, and I could hear my parents had finally gone to sleep, and I knew if I didn't get to sleep soon, I was going to get skipped over. The silence was interrupted by the sound of movement in my closet. I was never afraid of monsters because I always had my army of stuffed animals there to fight them off. So, my first thought was that Santa's elf was here to check on me to see if I was sleeping. Oh no. I thought to myself. I then covered my head in hopes of hiding the fact I was still awake, and I laid as still as I could. The noises in the closet didn't stop. They got louder, and I started to think he was stuck. Then I started to get really worried because it was one thing to be found awake by Santa, but what if he found me awake and knew I didn't help his elf out? Oh man, I am in big trouble. So terrified that my present was on the line, I slowly undid my cocoon and made my way to the closet. I opened the closet door and whispered inside. Please, please, please don't tell Santa I was awake. I am really trying to go to sleep, and I have been a good boy all year. Please don't tell him. I am going to sleep right now. I run back to my bed and dive into my blanket and cover up. The blankets were all up to my eyes, which was scary in itself because covering my mouth with the blanket would catch the blankets on fire, or so said my aunt, but this was an emergency. I had only left enough to see if the elf made it out safely. I then saw the dark silhouette of the elf quickly emerge from the closet, small as I thought it would be but no bells like I thought I would hear. Then it ran across my room to my door. I could see only really vague outlines of it reaching for the doorknob. I will never forget seeing the outline of the creature as it opened the door, and the light from the Christmas tree cast a perfect silhouette, and the elf's shape reminded me more of a gremlin than an elf, but since I had never seen an elf, it never bothered me. The figure left the room and ran down the hallway. I could hear the footsteps trailing until they faded away. Years later, my parents revealed to me that Santa wasn't real, and my mind shot back to this day and scared the poop out of me. I have told a few people this story and now the entire internet. Thinking back on it now scares the crap out of me, but people seem to enjoy the story, so enjoy. Scariest personal paranormal experience I've ever had, still unexplained. When I was about 13 years old, I had an upstairs bedroom in my parents' house. It was more of a loft than anything, so my room was the only thing that was upstairs, and I was completely alone. One night I was startled awake from a really deep sleep. I was sweating and my heart was racing, but I didn't know why I was panicking so much. I didn't remember having a dream or anything. I thought to myself that I was going to go downstairs and get a drink of water to calm down, but as soon as I lifted my head and tried to sit up, I felt something heavy on my chest push me back down. The panicky feeling came back, and I struggled to sit up but I couldn't. I started flailing and kicking my legs and trying to get whatever was on my chest off. Finally, after kicking and struggling, I was able to shoot straight up in bed, my heart pounding and my hair sticking to the sides of my face in a cold sweat. I frantically patted my blankets and sheets down on my bed to see if there was something on it still, but there was nothing. Then I looked back up across my room and I froze. You see, you can imagine my room as just a square. My bed was pushed up against the back corner of the room, and I had a large window that was right beside it. Then, across the room, directly parallel to my bed, was a tiny window that overlooked the driveway to our house. I didn't put blinds on either window because I liked being able to see the stars at night. Now back to the story. I looked across my room to that small window and saw that it was pitch black. There was no light, there were no shadows, nothing but blackness. I couldn't see through it at all. But when I slowly turned and faced the large window that was directly beside my bed, I could still see the trees, the stars, the moon, everything. When I turned to face the black and small window again, I froze, and it felt like my heart was going to explode out of my chest. There were two slanted red eyes staring back at me through the darkness. I instantly started crying and shaking, but I blinked. And it was gone. The window was back to normal. I could see the moonlight glinting off of the window pane and make out the trees in the distance. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night. 2010 San Diego UFO encounter, I still can't explain. Aloha from Hawaii, everyone. My name is Matthew, I am 27 years old, and I was born and raised in East County, San Diego, in a town called El Cajon. Before I tell this story, I would like to try and establish some kind of basis for sanity and reliability. I was a cryptologist in the Navy from 2012 to 2019. Prior to this experience, I can definitely say I didn't have a stance on UFOs/unidentified aerial phenomenons, but even after this event, I still am open to hearing other people's takes on what they feel I may have experienced. I would also like to say I would even be willing to take a polygraph test as a means of validating what I know I for sure saw. Until very recently, I have not told many people about this because 1, I don't have pictorial evidence, and 2, I didn't want to sound crazy, but with the Pentagon confirming the Navy unidentified aerial phenomenon videos that were captured off the coast of San Diego, I feel like what both me and my best friend saw in 2010 was valid. It was October 2010, and my stepmother had been admitted to the hospital for congested heart failure. My best friend lived 3 doors down from me, and we would always be at each other's house after school. It was about 8:30 to 9 p.m., and my dad and younger sister were about to leave for the hospital, but before they left, my dad came up to my room and asked me to take the trash out. My best friend Justin decided to come with me as we walked to the dumpster that was a few townhouses down. I chucked the trash in the dumpster, and as we started to walk back, he asked me, "Are you doing okay?" This was the first time anyone had asked me that the entire time my mom had been in the hospital. We stopped right outside of Building 12, and I specifically remember letting out a big sigh and dropping my head back as I looked up to the sky. Immediately my jaw actually dropped, as I could not believe what I was seeing. In the sky directly above my complex hidden in the clouds, just enough that I couldn't see any intricate details, was a dimly illuminated, perfect circle just hovering. It was massive. From where we were standing, it covered the span of the parking lot in one of our buildings. I estimate it to have had a diameter of 60 to 75 feet. Justin is staring at me, and I remember him asking me, "What?" I didn't take my eyes off whatever this light was and simply pointed up. I saw from my peripheral vision that he looked up and that his jaw dropped too. The thing about this UFO we were seeing that my brain just couldn't comprehend is how it was pretty windy outside and it wasn't moving, it didn't make any sounds, and the light wasn't radiating everywhere like a flashlight or street light would. It was only confined to the diameter of the circle. We stared for what felt like minutes, but in reality, it wasn't more than 10 to 15 seconds before it just completely disappeared before our eyes. Like instantaneously gone. Imagine if you turned a light switch off. We stared at the sky for a few more seconds before we looked at each other without saying a word, then started back at where we saw this thing. All of a sudden it was back. In the exact same spot. No sounds, no movement, nothing. It just reappeared in front of our eyes, like you turned the light switch back on. This time it stayed in the sky for about 5 seconds before instantly disappearing again for good. Justin and I tried our best to rationalize what we saw and figured it was the moon, but as we turned to walk back to my house, we very clearly saw the moon in the distance in a completely different area towards the entrance of our complex. To this day I have no idea what I saw, but I do know what I saw was real and was not something easily explained. If I hadn't looked up at that exact moment, I don't think we ever would have known it was there. I would love to hear your guys' take on this, and I will openly answer any questions the community may have. Thank you for your time. Unknown thing living in my home, or should I say my previous home? I don't know what it is, but I know something is there. For starters, I don't know what it is. I've talked to many people. Apparently there are multiple things living in the home, some that don't bother us, others that are just pranksters, but none that have harmed or tried to harm. One of them said there's something living in the bathroom mirror that's just there. It does nothing but chill. But this is not what this is about. What I'm about to talk about is someone I'll just nickname Jeff. My eyes are tearing, and I have goosebumps just talking about it. The nickname, Jeff, is simply because of the one time I caught a glimpse of it, and it looked like that creepypasta Jeff. But acts nothing like it. First is my name being called out. Each time the person said they never called me out, or they weren't even there at that time. Nothing really special ever happened. No, oh, I was going to call you for something or I was thinking of you, not even to prevent something. I've even recorded it once, showed the person in question, and they say they never called me out. Before you say they were just messing with me, the person in question wasn't even home. Second would be a very uneasy feeling when I'm downstairs at night. Alone. It's almost as if I'm being watched. It only happens if I'm downstairs alone. The third thing would be what I saw. One time while I was in the kitchen, I saw something peek around the stairs. It looked pretty much like Jeff. Never saw it again. The third would be when I talk about him. My eyes tear up, my insides get hot, and my outside gets cold and goosebumps. Also, for some reason, I always look behind me. Could just be natural. Fourth would be things going missing for years only to pop up where they never even were. When I was little, I had this Lego set. It was part of the outer space set they were pushing out. Years later, it turned up in the living room, under a chair. When it was actually last in my bedroom. That's not the only thing either, so it's not faulty memory. Fifth, the electronics that I use seem to go out when I mention that thing I saw to anyone. One time it was just the router. Another time it was my PC. The PC was physically unplugged. Plugs simply don't fall out with how I have them. This has since stopped since I moved. Sixth might just be my overreactive imagination, but I see things in my mind that aren't at a place I'm at. Sort of like screamers, except nothing's there, and I know it. Seventh is something that I haven't noticed, but my grandfather has. Growing up, I was told to never mention to him that I think the house might be haunted and whatnot. I was never given a reason. One day I did. He simply told me that he believes so, as he's seen shadowy figures. But only me and him are the only ones who have experiences in that house. 8 would be an urge to run upstairs at night without looking back. It might be just natural, but that is the only house I ever get that feeling. 9th would be what happened just now writing this. I thought I had a window open, but I just found out I didn't. There was a constant breeze in here. And this is not the same home. So maybe it's attached to me. Now for a history of the home. The home was bought by my grandparents some 40 plus years ago. They were the only ones who ever lived there, as before it was just farmland. While I lived there, I was living with my 2 grandparents, my 2 uncles, and my father. Weird encounter at sea. So basically this happened to me when I was working as a second officer on board a heavy lifting vessel about 1 year ago during my watch. The scariest thing I have encountered was during a routine night shift while passing the Atlantic Ocean. I was doing lapses around the bridge console to get some exercise while on watch and to relax a little bit. While passing the bridge windows, I saw someone walking from aft to forward on the starboard side, which was not unusual, just the time at 0130 was surprising. The crew was allowed to go outside whenever they wanted, so I didn't mind it at first. When I passed by the window again after doing a full lap, I noticed he was standing between cargo hold number 1 and the windbreaker, with his back turned to me, looking forward. I stopped to see what he was doing, and suddenly he turned around, looking straight at me, and he started to wave with his hand while standing perfectly still. This made me uneasy because, at this time, I started to notice some weird things. For example, he was wearing a white overall, which is normal for officers, but at our company, all overalls for officers and ratings are red with silver reflective strips on the shoulders. Also, he was wearing an orange helmet, which could have been possible. We have some, but all the crew has white helmets. Also, it should have been impossible to see me from forward. All lights on the bridge were off and the deck lights were in, so reflecting when watching from below. So while this person is standing there waving at me, I walk over to the console and grab my radio and try calling him. No response. He just kept waving, following me while walking around the bridge with his head. I saw him on the starboard side bridge, and the radio was on the port side bridge, near the cart table. After calling him again and only receiving static noises, I went back to the light console to turn on the bridge spotlights, which flooded the deck with light. I looked up from the console, and he was gone. So I think to myself, okay, he might be hiding in the stairway to the paint store or he is inside the passage to the forward station inside the windbreaker, and I wait with the lights on. After 30 minutes or so, I decided to turn off the lights but kept watching for some time but haven't seen him again. So the next morning I asked around if anyone was on deck during my watch, but everyone confirmed that they were sleeping during that time, which made sense to me, and it seemed like they were telling the truth. Also, no one owns a white overall, because again, our overalls are all red. Why would anyone walk around on deck at 0130 hours? We have no safety round and usually no additional lookout who is awake at this time. Usually it's only me during my watch. Some guys thought it was a prank, but no one knew anything about anyone planning or doing anything like this, not even when I asked them to tell me the truth. I believed them because why would they lie about this? I mean, I wouldn't be mad about it, not gonna lie, they would have gotten me good, so I would have laughed together with the prankster, but none said anything like it or admitted to it, even months later. What really freaked me out about this is the stiff movement of the person and the sudden staring while standing still. I can't explain what I saw, and I have no reasonable explanation to this day because no one admitted to pranking me or going on deck at this time. Also, the sudden disappearance when turning on the floodlights is still unexplained. I also checked the spot where I saw the person, and there was no evidence of hiding anywhere. The paint store stairway and the entrance to the bosun's store were locked every evening, and they were still locked when I checked them the next morning. So yeah, this was the only weird experience I had while working at sea for the last 5 years. I still cannot explain what I saw. I don't believe it was some hallucinations, because I saw him for at least 5 minutes, from walking to forward and standing and forward looking at me, and I turned away a few times to grab the radio or walk to the console. He only disappeared when I turned on the floodlights. But this was the only time I saw anything like it. Holy SHT, this happened last night. We live in the mountains, and there's a little store a 5-minute drive from our house that closes at 9 p.m. My roomie wanted me to go with her to get beers. It was about 8:40. I agreed. We drove to the store, and I joked with the guy working about their evening rush. I looked at my phone and saw that it was 8:50 and said something like, well, at least we're not bugging you right at close time or something. We got back in the car and started driving home. This store is off a main road. I say a main road, but it's not really, just the main drive through our area, no street lights, heavily wooded, 2 lanes, which we drove back onto and turned left. We live in a small community off the right side of this road, about half a mile from where we turned onto the main road. There are 3 entrances into this community, which is really just a collection of houses in a spider web-like sprawl of roads. All 3 are small roads off the right side of the road, and there are no other driveways or anything. The first entrance has quite a sharp drop off the main road, and it's easy to miss. It's the sketchiest one to take, and we often miss it because it's around a sharp turn and comes out of nowhere. The second entrance is the one we all usually take when coming from the direction we were driving in. It's across from a flagpole that is lit up with spotlights. That's pretty much the only light on the road, and definitely not something you could miss. This entrance also slopes downward into the park. The third entrance is like 3 miles past the first two, way down at the front of the park. It has a sign for the park, and when you drive into this entrance, the road slopes upward, while the other two entrances slope quickly downward. You get the mental image, I hope. So we turn left onto the main road, we're talking about whatever, we're not high or drunk or super into our conversation or in any way not paying a reasonable amount of attention. Then we see a car approaching from the right, the headlights coming through the trees toward us, but it's coming from the wrong angle to be approaching the main road from one of the roads that slope downward. This car is coming from above where it should be. We both say, "What the duck?" And then we pass the third, bottom entrance into the park, which is where this car is coming from and why it is coming from a higher angle than we expected. We should have taken about 1 minute from turning onto the main road to turning right into one of the first two entrances. We did not pass the first two entrances, nor the flagpole lit up by spotlights. We even passed the third entrance without realizing what it was because it was about 3 miles further than where we thought we were. I looked at the clock right when we realized we had skipped about 3 miles of road, and it was 9:15 p.m. We had left the store at 8:50 and driven for about 2 minutes, losing 3 miles and 25 minutes. We have literally driven this exact stretch of road hundreds of times. We have lived in our current house for 3 years and in this immediate area our whole lives. There was no way we just zoned out and drove 3 miles down a super windy road past a ducking spotlighted flagpole without noticing and spent 25 minutes doing it. We're still freaked out. Unknown shadows. When I was little, maybe about 8 or 9, maybe younger, I lived in a trailer in my hometown of Bluffton, Ohio, with my mom, stepdad, dog, and cat. I had my friend, Kathleen, staying the night, since it was one of the last times I could spend time with her before she moved. It was an unusually quiet summer night. Now remember this next part, my mom and stepdad were asleep in their room down at the far end of the trailer. My dog, Cooper, was asleep in his cage, with the door open, and my cat, Smokey, was asleep on my stomach. Kathleen and I were still awake as we just finished a movie, but we were on my pull-out couch. Suddenly the room got chilly, and we see 3 shadows being cast against the hallway wall. A cat, a dog, and a human. All the doors in the trailer were closed and the windows covered. Kathleen grabbed my arm and whispered, "Did you see that?" I was in shock but managed to squeak out, "Yes, I did." We stared at the hallway longer to see if we saw it again, but we didn't. After that, we never saw it again. And shortly after, Kathleen moved away, but we stayed in touch. She gave me permission to use her name. The strangest thing that ever happened to me was about 24 years ago in Tennessee, out near Buffalo Mountain. There's a forest in a valley there along the Irwin Highway. The trees are very tall and the canopy thick, so thick that it's dark in the forest even at midday, with little or no vegetation as almost no light gets through. This is a few miles from ETSU, where I was in school at the time, and my roommate and I had a buddy drop us off at a gravel road that goes up the back side of Buffalo Mountain to do some off-trail hiking. The front side has a park and official hiking trails and such, but the back side is more primitive. There was a logging camp and an old abandoned fire tower. There's a small overgrown hidden valley where we found the remnants of old stone foundations of forgotten homesteads, some primitive grace markers, some rock carvings, and old overgrown stone fire pits that subsequently we went back and cleaned out and camped at many times. We camped there at one of the fire pits that night, hiked up the mountain and back down camping at the same site again, and then got a late start back into town the next day. Anyhow, as we were hiking down the valley road along this dark forest, we decided to check it out. There were a few disused campsites with 55-gallon drums as trash barrels and steel ring fire pits, and a couple even had an old picnic table. After poking around the edges in this dark forest for a while, we went further in. It was really eerie, totally silent, not a sound, not a plant on the ground, not even a ducking squirrel. We hiked back out to the road and found that it was starting to get dark, and we didn't realize it because it was so dark under the canopy, so we decided to put one of the old campsites to use. We made cans and only built a small fire as it wasn't particularly cold, had a bite to eat, then napped for a while. When we woke up, it was pitch black, and the fire had burned to just a few embers. It had gotten a little chill in the air, so we decided to burn one and build a fire. John started trying to start up a fire with some kindling and the few remembering embers, and I started rolling one. I looked up from what I was doing and saw something glowing faintly in the woods, then another and another. They were very faint and orb-like, and there were perhaps 24 of them floating amongst the trees. They had kind of swirling shifting colors, but very faint, and they appeared to vary in size from about the size of a softball to about the size of a beach ball, but it was hard to tell because it was hard to focus on them or determine exactly how far they were from me. Only when they passed behind and in front of relatively nearby trees was I able to judge an approximate distance. I was so focused on them that I didn't notice that John had also completely stopped what he was doing and was staring into the trees as well. We had been watching them for quite some time when this occurred to me, yet still I said nothing. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they faded back into the trees and were gone. I asked John, "Did you see those?" John, "Yeah." Me, "Lights." John, "Yeah, like balls of light." We talked a little more. We were both a little freaked out by it. Then we made a fire, a big fire, burned one and went to sleep. We never spoke of it again, not until recently. At Thanksgiving, we stopped to see John and his wife on the way to my mother's. I had recently thought of the orbs of light for some reason. I'd almost convinced myself that it hadn't actually happened, that it was a dream maybe. John remembered it too. It was the first time we'd talked of it in nearly a quarter of a century. Shadow figures. Yesterday my younger sister saw a shadow figure seemingly watching over the room, slightly bending, leaning against a cat-scratching post, tall as our single-action pedal harp, 170 centimeters, beside it. She woke up in the middle of the night to some noise, but she doesn't remember what noise it was. That's when she saw the figure. The light in the bathroom behind the closed door was on, which is strange because nobody left it on. The figure was just standing there, leaning against the cat-scratching post, as if it were watching over the room. My sister spoke to it, thinking it was me. She asked, "Who's there?" but got no answer. She asked 2 more times, and when she got no answer, she turned to the other side of the bed in fear and didn't look back at it. She asked me if I went to the bathroom in the night, which I did, but I didn't turn the lights on there. I never do, and it wasn't on when I went there. Also, I didn't lean against the cat-scratching post and didn't hear anyone talking to me, so it definitely wasn't me. After my younger sister's experience with the shadow person, we talked a lot about what happened. We talked about it throughout the day and into the late evening randomly, but there was this feeling in me that maybe it was some ancestor of ours watching over us, protecting us. My sister felt that too. She didn't feel like it had bad intentions, and the fear she felt was more a fear of the unknown. However, late in the evening she asked me to move the cat-scratching post to the other side of the room. The room is only partly divided by a wall. It's like 2 separate rooms but with no doors, making it one big room with a wall splitting it in 2 halves with 2 entrances with gaps big enough you could fill several doors on the farther side and 2 doors on the nearer side to the stairs that lead to the room. So I moved the cat-scratching post there and went to bed without much worry. It definitely was in my head, but I didn't feel bothered much, and my thoughts were positive. I prayed like I do every night for the past 2+ weeks and tried to fall asleep, but I couldn't. I was just turning in my bed, and I felt like I was asleep for a little while and then woke up, and it continued like this for like forever. Then at some point I woke up from a short sleep again in the middle of the night. I don't know what time it was, but it could be any time from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. I opened my eyes facing the side of the room where I moved the cat-scratching post, and I saw something standing there right at the entrance to the other half of the room. I was shocked and paralyzed. I didn't recognize the shape of it, but I strongly felt there's something there, and it was tall. The moon is waxing these days, and I could see the jalousies illuminated by the moonlight, but then they turned dark, as if a shadow passed in front of them back and forth. I also remember seeing something like little red lights dancing in that part of the room. I thought to myself, great, so yesterday you scared my sister, and now you're showing up to me. I asked it to leave, but just in my thoughts. Right after that I heard a loud noise as if something hit the window, like when a bird crashes into a window, then another noise followed, like as if someone scratched a windowsill. After a while, another windowsill scratching sound followed, and then it stopped. My initial thoughts were, so it left out of the window. After that, I felt like there's nothing in the room anymore, but I felt scared afterwards and couldn't fall asleep again until much later. I felt like whatever it was wasn't bad, it just felt curious, playful, and a little mischievous. I also remember that the bathroom was dimly lit again, but nobody left the lights on. The light wasn't as bright as when the light is switched on, but it was like half that bright. Could be the moonlight though. I still wonder what it is and how to make it go away. I will keep praying and asking it to leave us alone because I want my sound sleep back. About 6 years ago, I, 39, male, was sitting on the couch with my son, who at that time was 8 years old. I was watching TV, and he was playing on his iPad. For whatever reason, He opened the Maps app and was zooming in and out on different places of the Texas map. He zoomed into our location. We live in the Dallas/Fort Worth area, and pulled up the street view and thought it was really cool to see our home on the app. He asked me to show him where his granny's maternal grandmother, also in DFW, house was, so I did, and he pulled up the street view on it as well and got a kick out of it too. As you would expect, my son wanted to zoom into different homes of people we knew and pull up the street view on those as well. After a while, we started running out of places to zoom into, and so he asked me where my grandparents lived. My mom's parents. Now, just a little background, I'm Mexican American. Both of my parents were born in a town called Nuevo Laredo in the northern state of Tamaulipas, in Mexico. As a young kid, we would go visit my maternal grandparents there during the holidays or during the summer. Over the years, both of my grandparents passed away, and my aunt, mom's sister, inherited that house. Because of all the heavy drug cartel presence there, we have never taken my son or his little sisters to Nuevo Laredo. My wife and I just do not feel comfortable given the high crime rate there. As a result, my children have never met my aunt, who inherited the house, nor my grandparents, as they passed away before they were born. I myself have not been there in quite some time and haven't seen my aunt in person in about 15 years. My aunt's son, I'll call him Joe, lives close to me, and he talks to her often over the phone. I talk to Joe frequently, and I keep track of how my aunt is doing through him. I rarely speak to her on the phone, and the only time I do is if I'm hanging out with Joe and he has her on speakerphone. We will speak briefly and say hello to each other, and that's about it. I don't even have her number saved on my phone. I returned to the couch with my son. I tried to remember the address of that house but could only remember the street name. I couldn't remember the house number for the life of me, so I decided to start with typing in the street name and city, then use the street view to try and recognize the area and the house. So, as I zoom into the street, I recognize an old basketball court that was only a few blocks from my grandparents' house. I continue pressing the forward arrows on the street view, and each time I do, I see homes or buildings that I recognize, and I began to get more and more confident that I was getting very close to coming up on that house. I finally get to a home that I recognized as being right next to my grandparents' house, and so on the very next click, there it was in front of me, and I was almost excited to have found it. To my surprise, there on the screen was my aunt on the sidewalk, about to walk into the house. The Google Street View car must have driven by at that very moment when my aunt was getting home. I immediately said out loud to my son, "Oh look, there's my aunt." Here's where things got weird. As soon as I said that, my phone rings, and I look down. I see a number that I don't recognize, but it's from Mexico. I was reluctant to answer as I was thinking it could be a spam call. But because it was from Mexico, I answered. After saying hello, I hear a lady speaking Spanish say, "Hi mijo, how are you?" And I reply in Spanish, "Hi, who is this?" And she says, "Joe, it's me, your mom, silly," and I immediately recognized her voice, to which I replied, "Hi Aunt Mary, this isn't Joe, it's me." I tell her my name. She replies, "Oh, mijo, I'm sorry, I was trying to call Joe, I must have dialed the wrong number." I said, "You're not going to believe what just happened." After I explained to her what I had just experienced, she was also very intrigued and said that she was sure she had clicked on my cousin's name when she made that call. Keep in mind, my aunt never calls me directly, and the last time I had spoken to her before that was at least 6 months prior to this, and it was on my cousin's phone. To this day, I still can't make sense of what happened that day. Has anyone else experienced something like this? In 2016, we had just moved back to the States after living overseas for 10 years. My daughter was born here but remembered nothing of it. When she was tiny, before we moved away, we'd go to the local mall sometimes to the play area and to ride the carousel. One afternoon in September, we drove over there so she could see the old neighborhood, and we went by the mall. It was almost completely shuttered, signs gone, parking lot empty, only a couple stores left, food court shut down, carousel, and play area gone. Even the theater across the road had closed. It was sad. This used to be a destination, a supermall. When we got home, I told my husband about it, and he wanted to see it, so the next day he and I drove there. What I saw was the only thing that's ever caused me to gape, mouth open. Fully open mall, signs intact, anchor stores still there, every space had a store, full of people, carousel going, play area full of kids, food court open, across the street the theater was lit up and people all around. I was speechless, literally. My husband started to tease me but saw the confusion on my face and stopped. We got back in the car and went home. My daughter fully thought I was joking until I took her back there. She was speechless. All of this is true. I don't know what happened that day, but it did happen. Neither my daughter nor I have viewed reality in the same way since. This past year in college, we had a ghost named Gideon living in our dorm that has followed my roommate from place to place, or so he claims. He dubbed the ghost Gideon. He would hear his name, have his bed being shaken in the middle of the night, stuff like that. He wasn't the only one to experience it. As the school year went on, Gideon began to get comfortable with all of us, and activity began to be frequent. When alone, I've heard faucets running, looking about and finding nobody to be in the dorm apartment. I've heard knocking on my door, and when I opened it, nobody would be there. I'd hear knocking on my door, quick little raps of about 3 to 5 knocks every time I'm alone in the dorm apartment with my bedroom door closed. Every once in a while late in the night, I'll hear a loud slap on my door or on my wall. I have a metal water bottle I keep on my windowsill, and one night it sounded as though someone was just picking it up and setting it down softly, just enough so there would be a metallic clinking on the sill, which happened to be made of concrete or something. I heard a noise as though something had fallen off of my desk. When I woke up, my chapstick was on the floor beside my bed, which had originally been standing up in the middle of my desk. I heard it drop to the floor the night before, but my windows were closed and my fan was off, so I don't know how it could have gotten there. Something handed my pillow to me. I woke up sometime in the night to find it wasn't on the bed, reached out groggily, and it was suddenly in my hand. Something had tried unlocking my roommate's door from the outside. He found little scratches from where the door meets the frame, and the catch on the door was scratched as well. I had a guest spending the night, and they saw some strange shadow moving on my ceiling, and we tried to recreate the shadow but couldn't. The shades were down, so there wasn't too much light coming in. My roommate was alone and saw somebody out of the corner of his eye walking past his room. Doesn't sound weird, but the figure was walking towards the wall that's just windows, and there's nothing there other than a couch. When he left his room to see who it was, there was nobody there, and nobody could have gone anywhere, being that we were on the 5th floor. My other roommate, the one that brought Gideon with him one afternoon, of course, when alone, saw a shadow figure walk into one of the bathrooms. One night I experienced a loud knock on my door. I said, "Yeah?" Got up and opened my door. There was, of course, nobody there, and at the same time as I opened my door, my roommate across from me opened his door, claiming somebody knocked on his door. He thought it was me, I thought it was him. We had our doors knocked on at the exact same time. I never felt Gideon was a bad presence, just kind of there and doing his thing. There was never anything bad that happened to any of us having him there, other than an eerie feeling being alone in the place, as though you weren't entirely alone. Mississippi Faceless Man. So, I write this, not for advice or for any real reason, to be honest. Though I just wondered if anyone else has seen or heard from someone else of the man. So, I was maybe 9 or 10 years old in Mississippi, visiting my grandma with my sister. It was the middle of the night, and I had been watching TV. Wanting a drink, I got out of my grandparents' living room to go to the kitchen. Now, my grandmother had a deck and a huge window that would show outside. My grandma lived right by the woods and rarely saw anyone at night that weren't hunters look engine for deer. I look out the big window, feeling scared all of a sudden. And outside is a man in a black suit with no face. At least, that's what it looked like. Seeing a man with no face is horrifying, especially right next to the woods, and you know no one else is awake at the time. I went to the kitchen to get my drink, then looked out the bay window in my grandma's dining room, which was attached to the kitchen. The faceless man was closer to the window now, and he just stood there, unmoving but seemingly staring right at me. My chest was pounding with fear. After all, the man was closer than before. Going back to the living room, knowing I'd be safe due to the locked doors, but also still kind of freaking out, I just watched the TV. I finished drinking my drink and stand up, looking out the window in the living room. The man was closer once again. Still staring me down, his hands by his sides. Feeling even more panicked, I go to throw away the can of soda. I had to drink in the kitchen. I looked out the bay window once more, and he hadn't moved closer. I walked back to the living room and turned the TV off, feeling eyes stare me down. My grandma was asleep, her husband was asleep with his sleep apnea machine going on in the background in their room. I left the living room to go to my room shared with my sister. I never looked back. I walked in my room to find my sister passed out, soft snores leaving her lips. I laid down on the ground and fell asleep. Maybe a year later, we were back in Mississippi. Except this time in my grandma's cabin, literally in the middle of the woods. My sister and one of my cousins were already there, setting the house up to sleep there for the night. I was in the car with my second cousin, he was driving, and we were talking. I told him about the faceless man who had scared me a year or so ago outside our grandma's house. He joked and said it was him. And yes, while that is possible, after all, they were roughly the same height and body type, it couldn't have been him. You see, later that night, my cousin, who had said it was him, and my sister were asleep on the couch. I had fallen asleep but woke up in the middle of the night, feeling eyes on me once again. I follow where I felt the stare, and lo and behold, there he was again, the faceless man. Still in his suit. Except he seemed taller this time. I turned back to the couch my sister and cousin were on, and my cousin was still there. It couldn't have been my other cousin who had left previously, because my cousin and the faceless man had completely different statures. The cousin who had left was a bigger man in the midsection and was shorter than the cousin on the couch with my sister. After that night, I never saw that man again. And I often wondered if it was my imagination, or perhaps a dream. Though I know the first time wasn't a dream, as I was physically up and moving and watching TV. I had a friend a few years ago who said she had seen the man too, except in her house in the basement. Has anyone else seen this man? Or was my friend lying and making stuff up so I didn't feel bad or scared? If so, I'd love to hear your story, as I'm genuinely curious. My name is John, and in 2008, when I started college, I had decided to move into my friend Ethan's home in Lambertville, New Jersey. Ethan and I were good friends in high school. He was one grade ahead of me, but our friend group was quite tight-knit, and we had spent a lot of time together. Over the course of the next few years, I personally experienced many strange things in the house, including disembodied voices, objects moving/floating on their own, and strange lights in the woods surrounding our house. Even with all that, I never felt truly scared of the house or our encounters and had just grown to accept that the house could often be very strange. The house was in a more rural part of Lambertville, so the closest neighbor was around 1,000 feet away, and we were surrounded by woods on every side. We quite often went out into the woods at night, generally just my friend and me, but sometimes our other friends would come with us. It was seldom that we actually experienced anything at all, though a lot of our encounters were experienced by multiple people. My friend had always insisted throughout high school that his house was haunted, but frankly, I never truly believed any of that until I had moved in and started witnessing these things for myself. In 2011, when I was 22 years old, around springtime, my friend Ethan had a job as a toll bridge officer. His shift was from 4 p.m. to 12 p.m., so I was used to him getting home late at night, and we would often chill and watch a movie after he got home. Most of my classes were late morning/early afternoon, and I am a night owl, so it was common for me to be up when he arrived back home from his shift. One night, I was up late playing some video games in my upstairs bedroom when, shortly after 12 p.m., I heard the downstairs door slam. Then I could hear frantically paced footsteps ensue up the stairs. At this point, I kind of turned my ear towards the door to listen, because I had never heard my friend rush into the house like this. He was quite a heavy-set guy, and I was more accustomed to him lumbering up the steps, taking his time. After I heard someone practically sprinting up the steps, I started to hear panic banging on my door. My friend's voice called out to me, pleading for me to open the door. I got up, opened the door, and my friend Ethan was on the other side. He immediately shoved me aside, then he turned and locked the door behind him, after which he ran over to my bed to sit on it. My bed had a window right by the head of the bed, and my friend pushed the curtain out of the way to look out the window towards the front yard. He was breathing heavily, beads of sweat running down his face. I had never seen him like that before. I knew something was clearly wrong with him, so I started to inquire what was wrong. Ethan? What's going on? Is everything all right? He refused to respond, his gaze fixed on the lawn out in front of the house. I kept asking him questions, but after several minutes of me pressing him for answers and him being completely silent, I decided to drop it. I ended with, "Okay. Well, I am here if you want to talk, man." So I just sort of got back to playing some video games at my computer desk. 2 hours passed, and finally I heard Ethan speak up. "I think I'm ready to talk about what happened." Of course, being a curious person, I instantly turned off my game, turned around in my chair, and was all ears. Ethan told me that after he finished his shift, he came home as usual and pulled into our driveway. As he pulled in, his headlights hit some figures in the front yard. He instantly sort of wrote it off as a deer, as it was quite usual to see deer chowing down in our front yard late at night. He parked his Jeep, turned it off, and started to make his way across our gravel driveway towards the house, which is roughly a 50-foot walk. We always use the side entrance, but you have a good view of the front yard while walking towards the house. He was about halfway to the house when he spotted this figure again, standing in the front yard. The moon was illuminating it, and he got this strange sense to stop and try to make out what it was. He said he was just standing there about 100 feet away from this figure, staring at its glowing white eyes as his own eyes were adjusting to the darkness. The more his eyes adjusted, the more tense he became, because it slowly dawned on him that what he was staring at was not a deer. It was too pale and too tall, and whatever it was had its gaze locked on him. After a few moments, his eyes fully adjusted, and he could tell that this figure was indeed not a deer, it was a person. Even more horrifying was that this person was fully naked, its skin glistening in the moonlight. My friend froze and felt completely stunned. He could not blink or look away, he was totally paralyzed with fear. He said he stared at this unknown individual for a few more seconds, when he slowly came to the realization that this person looked exactly like him. It was the same height, same body shape, even the same face as his own, but was stark naked, standing in the front yard staring at him. My friend said at this point, he got this intense primal fear, like he was looking at some sort of alpha predator. He says he does not remember what happened next. The next thing he remembered was being upstairs, pounding on my door, like he completely blacked out from his fear. After he told me this, I told him I would go outside to check around with a flashlight to see if I could see anything. I think I remember asking him if he could come with me, but he refused and opted to stay in the house. I went out with a flashlight, there was no sign of anyone or anything outside of the house. I came back in, and together we went around the house, making sure all the doors and windows were securely locked. Something very similar happened to another friend of ours who came to visit not too long after, and we later found out no one had told him about any of the paranormal events we had experienced beforehand. The main differences for that experience were that it was daytime, the person our friend witnessed was fully clothed, and it resembled a different friend of ours, not himself. Thinking about the story to this day sort of makes the hair stand up on my neck. I had experienced some strange stuff myself but had never witnessed any figures or ghosts or what have you myself. I was trucking down in the States with my ex. We had traveled coast to coast and had many weird experiences. This just happened to be one of the more paranormal, instead of just freaky experiences. New Orleans at the beginning of August 2005. We had finally made it to New Orleans, the home of Voodoo and Mardi Gras. Ever since my brother told me about the graveyards, the voodoo shops, and the other strange things, I wanted to go see them. Call it morbid curiosity or just simply fascination with the macabre. Either way, I wanted to go. I heard the mausoleums and headstones are beautiful, and the local lore had me interested. I had just gotten a new 35mm camera. I had taken a few photography classes in high school, so I wanted to capture the area in the best way I knew how. I know, 35mm was old school even back in 2005, but something about not knowing if a shot came out and not having instant gratification made me feel like I was some sort of real artist. We had dropped the trailer at the Home Depot we were unloading at and drove down to the Lafayette Cemetery. We zigged and zagged through the streets in complete awe of the old plantation-type homes. There was this gigantic home that looked like it could house at least half a football team. The place was utterly beautiful, but something very uneasy about it. I'm sure a lot of horrible things had happened there, so we didn't stop and we drove right on by. My ex did not, and I do mean did not like anything unknown, spiritual, or mildly occult-like. So he flat out refused to go with me, stating it was boring, but I could see that he was actually scared. Pulling into the nearly empty street, I had half expected there to be tons of people there. From what I had gathered, this was a tourist attraction. Since it was a residential area, we couldn't park the bobtail truck. He tossed me the cell phone that had like 15 minutes of prepaid call time left on and said to call him when I was done. He basically dropped me off at the gate and sped away like a complete chicken. The mausoleums looked like finely built houses, sitting there on stone pads, some of them growing moss and others having fresh flowers on their stoops. Walking the stone paths that weave through the hallowed ground. There was a complete ominous feeling like I was being watched. It filled me with dread. The hairs on my neck stood up, and a chill ran through my body, causing my very existence to run cold. It was borderline 90 degrees outside, but it caused me to shiver. I continued along the path, clicking away on my camera, taking pictures of the weeping cherub angles and the praying figures that marked headstones. I must have lost track of time, and the sun was starting to dip down over a particularly unnerving tree. I had forgotten we were in the south, and the possibility of a snake or something equally unsettling falling from that tree dawned on me, prompting me to make my way back to the gate. The towering gate looked even more sinister in the dim light. I quickened my pace and spotted a lady of African descent. She was probably nearing 80 years old and very frail looking with a bright colored outfit, and her gray hair peeked out of a bandana-type headdress. Necklaces of what appeared to be wood or possibly bone draped her neck. I must have startled her because she snapped her head in my direction in such a swift movement I was surprised she hadn't broken her neck. She was looking me straight in the face. She had one milky eye, the other darted back and forth like it was searching for something to focus on. She had appeared so quickly I was visibly shook. She probably sensed my fear. I rationalized with myself that it was totally possible she was leaning down to put flowers on the nearby grave, but as I got closer to where she was, I didn't see any flowers. She motioned for me to come over. And despite my gut feeling, I walked cautiously over to where she stood. I assumed she just needed help getting up or help with her car or something. I was trying to be a good citizen and get my good karma points for the day. I thought I was far enough away that if for some reason I needed to bolt, I could. But I was apparently within arm's length of her. Swifter than a freaking lion, she grabbed my arm so tight she left bruises on my forearm. Her nails digging into my skin, I let out a small squeak of terror. She pulled me towards her leathery face and her milky eye. Her good eye was black as pitch, and the whites had yellowed over time. Small serpents of red slithered across her face. She smelled rotting leaves and blood. She smelled like death. She spoke to me in a very deep, I have smoked 3 packs a day for the last 40 years deep, raspy voice to get out. Excuse me? I thought this was a public cemetery. I'm just visiting. I mean, no harm, I managed to whisper. Pulling me closer to her face, I could see her gnarly, snarled teeth. The few that were left were tobacco-stained and barely hanging on for dear life. Her hot breath was pungent, and I swallowed back a gag. Leave this place, or you will drown for your sins. I hear off in the distance. Hello? Hey, are you there? You need me to pick you up. I had a ninja death grip on my phone, which I had apparently dug out of my bag while the old lady had me in her clutches. I must have dialed it. But I don't remember entering a number. And we didn't have any numbers on speed dial. So the fact my ex was on the other line was a blessing in disguise. Just as quickly as she snatched me, she let me go, almost forcibly throwing me to the ground. She was strangely strong for someone who looked frail. I had walked outside the gate, waiting on the curb for my ex to come around the corner. It was getting much darker, and the chirping of crickets started off in the distance. I could still see the lady pacing back and forth at the grave, watching me. Her mouth was still moving, like she was talking to herself or perhaps cursing me. The chicken lights of the truck came into view, and I was finally safe. The hero of the story had shown up on his white horse to save me. Or in this case, the Yahoo in a purple bobtail Peterbilt jerked to an abrupt stop as I nearly jumped into the street to get away from the cemetery. Flinging open the door in one failed swoop, I hopped into the front seat and slammed the door shut. Looking confused, my ex asks me why I look so scared and immediately begins to poke fun at me, saying I was nervous and that I was afraid of the dark and that he told me I shouldn't visit the place of the dead. I told him what had happened with the old lady and exclaimed, "Hell yeah, I was scared, that old lady was freaky as duck." He looked at me blankly and asked, "What lady?" and motioned towards the gate. She had simply vanished. There were no other cars in the street, and it was empty besides the idling semi-truck. There was only one way in and one way out of the cemetery, and we were parked right in front of the gate. If anyone had come through the gate, we would have seen it. I stressed to my ex we needed to leave the state, telling him the old lady had warned me. He didn't believe me but still put in for a job heading out of the south. We had put in for a few different trips. One was a quickie to Georgia and the other finished in Northern California, but it had us deadheading, driving empty to a pickup location, which we wouldn't get paid for, to Biloxi, Mississippi. Later that night, we got confirmation that we had gotten the load to Northern California. That night we were on the road out of Louisiana. 2 weeks later, Hurricane Katrina hit. Had I not listened to the old lady in the Lafayette Cemetery, we could have very well been added to the casualties list. Haunted Cemetery Experience. I was 17, and it was mid-October, nearing Halloween. My family and I had gone to a really small, fairly rural town to meet a group of family friends for dinner and catch up for old time's sake, as my siblings and I had grown up with the children of the other families. After dinner, the parents stayed at the bar drinking, and those of us that weren't of legal drinking age were starting to get a little bored. That's when one of my friends brought up the cemetery. Apparently, there's a cemetery in this town that's said to be haunted. I think some ghost hunter / paranormal type show did an episode about it or something, but the legends are said to have been around since before that. The story goes that a group of teenage boys wandered into the graveyard one Halloween night with the intention of causing trouble and maybe stirring up some spooky ghost action in celebration of Halloween. After ducking around for a while with no unexplained phenomena, they decided to sit on top of this mausoleum, which is basically just a big tomb built up around a coffin instead of actually burying it in the ground. They were about to call it quits and head home when all of a sudden, unseen hands seemed to push one of the boys off the top of the tomb and onto the ground. All the boys are obviously scared shitless and hightail it out of there. All of them described feeling an eerie, ominous energy following them around for weeks after the incident. There have also been numerous reports of orbs, headstones inexplicably moving or disappearing, ghostly apparitions, inscriptions being changed, flashes of light, strange noises, the whole works. I, of course, was more than excited to check it out. We arrived at the cemetery well after dark, and one of my girlfriends, we'll call her Emma, and I were the only two brave enough to go in. We hopped out of the car, careful to be as inconspicuous as we could since we didn't want the police showing up and ruining our ghost hunting experience, and headed toward the entrance. It was chilly and a bit windy, as autumn in Wisconsin tends to be. We gripped each other's hands and started down the gravel path. As soon as we passed the fence that surrounded the plot of land, everything seemed to get very still and quiet. We couldn't even hear the wind anymore, which was strange as it had definitely been breezy as we got out of the car. It was so silent that even whispering in our steps in the gravel seemed, pun absolutely intended, loud enough to wake the dead. Though there were no lights in or near the cemetery, there was enough moonlight filtering through the clouds to allow us to see pretty well. We soon realized we had no idea where the fabled haunted mausoleum was, but kept walking anyway. We made a random left turn, and, lo and behold, there it was, about 30 yards in front of us. Pretty good luck, right? As we approached, I began to feel almost an electric sort of energy in my fingers and hands, but I wrote this off as just nerves or something due to breaking the law. We reached the tomb, and this thing is huge. It was twice my height at least and made of weathered gray stone with moss and lichen growing sparsely on it. We stare for a moment, and Emma whispers, "You should touch it." Being the badass ghost hunter I am, I oblige. There's really nothing remarkable about the cool roughness of the stone, so I decide to take it a step further and hop up to sit on the lip of the curved top of the thing. Again, nothing happens, so I jokingly whisper, "If there's anyone here, any spirits or anything, come on out."
After listening in silence for a second, I think, duck it, and make my way to the very top, where that kid is rumored to have been pushed off by ghostly hands.
I have Emma snap a photo or two before climbing back down. Slightly disappointed by the lack of spooky encounters, we agree to head out and are about to do just that when we see a pair of headlights slowly creeping down the road that borders one side of the graveyard. We immediately assume someone noticed us and called the cops, so we crouch down behind some bushes with the mausoleum directly to our left to hide. Both of us are completely silent except our breathing as we watch the vehicle slowly make its way down the street. I'm watching its tail lights turn the corner when I hear a low, creepy, menacing laugh coming from my back right. It sounded so strange, like it was a few feet away but also right in my ear. I'm freaked out, and I'm about to chalk it up to some kind of adrenaline-induced hallucination when Emma, who is standing to my left, whispers, "Hey! Did you hear that?" My blood ran cold as I slowly nodded a silent, "Yes, I did." I cautiously turn my head in the direction I heard it come from and, see a dark figure stand up from one of the headstones not 10 feet away from us. I scream bloody murder and somehow end up on the ground as the next thing I know Emma is pulling at my arm shouting, "We have to run, we need to get out of here. Come on, we have to go." I let her pull me to my feet and lead me blindly by the hand. We're full out sprinting, tripping over gravestones and plants, and who knows what else in the dark, and we can't even find the exit in our panic. We finally reach a gap in the fence, and I can feel tears streaming down my face as I run for my life down the middle of the road, not even paying attention to the oncoming headlights until I nearly run into them. Luckily, it was the car containing the rest of our friends, and we rip the door open and throw ourselves inside screaming, "Go, go, please just drive." Before we've even bothered to sit in an actual seat or shut the door, I can't remember who was driving, but I think our panic and terror shook them enough that they did what was asked of them and sped away back to the bar. They kept asking us what happened and if we were okay, but we couldn't calm down enough to answer until we were back inside the bar and sat down. Still shaking and out of breath, we recounted our story to all of them, drunk parents included. I think a lot of them were pretty skeptical, and honestly, I would have been too if I hadn't experienced it myself. In the weeks that followed, I felt that same eerie energy the boys in the legend described hanging over my head. Personally, I attribute it more to paranoia after being scared out of my mind by something I couldn't actually see than some kind of curse, but it made me uneasy nonetheless. It's been a few years since this happened, and I still cannot think of a single logical explanation for what happened that night. While I have no idea how credible anyone else's reported experiences with this place are, I know we were without a doubt the only people in that graveyard, or even on the streets for that matter, and we would have heard someone trying to sneak up on us. The sound of that laugh was so unnatural, too. I can't get it out of my head, even now. I have never been more scared than I was that night, and I now know what people mean when they talk about not being able to fully believe in the paranormal until you've experienced it firsthand. Anyway, just thought I'd share this experience with you guys, as it was my first and most memorable ghost experience. One day, my cousins and I were playing in the backyard. It was a warm, sunny day in mid-July. The air was kind of hazy and full of the sounds of summer. Insects hid in the long grass just outside the boundaries of the safe garden, and Heath ran right through without a fence, gate, or any other type of barrier dividing our private back garden from the public, very busy Heath. For example, if you were playing in the back garden and a random person walked past on the way to the house, they were clearly visible from anywhere within the vicinity of the garden, as well as being very audible, even down to the point that if the person knew our family, they were able to conduct a simple conversation with whatever kids were playing there. Gran always told all us kids that the area directly outside the limit of the garden was strictly forbidden, and because she knew us three girls better than the back of her hand, this statement came with an extremely stern warning that if this rule wasn't followed, we would all receive smacked bottoms. We all abided, even though the three of us had adventurous spirits. At the time of this incident, we were all playing on the crazy path that our builder uncles had made to make it easier for my wheelchair to run safely along the ground as I played with the other kids. Elle was pushing me as fast as she could, and I in turn was pushing the ancient family pram that had been there longer than any of us had. We were playing mummies. As usual, being the oldest, our cousin G was mum and picking flowers for the milk bottle in our tree/bush house. It was more a cluster of bushes at the bottom of the garden with a clearing, which was easier to adapt into a wheelchair-accessible treehouse where all us kids played at one time or another. Suddenly, there was a sense of not being alone. I think Elle and I both noticed this at the same time because we raised our heads and looked in the exact direction where the creeping feeling resonated. Just outside the back garden's entrance stood a strange-looking figure. We all said, after the incident, that the figure appeared to be a middle-aged stocky man dressed in shabby dark clothes. He called out, "Hello, how are you?" We didn't answer as we usually did to passers-by who we knew. The stranger continued, "I've lost my dog, have you seen a little white dog?" Being ever protective, G answered curtly, "No, we haven't seen any dogs at all." The stranger didn't look at G but kept his attention on Elle and I, although he did respond to G's remark. "Oh, dear. Will you help me look for her? She's not very old, and she might be lost, she couldn't have gotten too far." I automatically began to feel uneasy, and I knew Elle felt the same as I felt her pull my wheelchair back. I let go of the pram, even though we were a good distance away from the stranger. The stranger was motionless throughout this discourse. Indeed, it was eerie how still he was. G just turned 11, he was adamant. "I'm sorry about your dog, but we can't help you, we aren't allowed to leave the garden." The stranger remained still and measured. "Come on. You won't be away for long, I will pay you £5 if you help." Just then, our older male cousin came around the side of the house pushing his bike, followed by a family friend who also lived at the house. They had both returned home from work. Our attention was momentarily distracted away from the figure by their sudden arrival, and when we looked back in the direction the stranger had been, he had completely vanished. Seeing his sister G's perplexed look, our cousin H said, "What's up with you?" We all excitedly told H and our family friend about the strange happening and the man. While the family friend, slightly unnerved by our account, rounded the three of us up and hurried us inside, H immediately marched out of the back garden in the direction of where we said the man must have gone, cursing under his breath about dirty old men, perving on little girls. Only to return 20 minutes later hot, bothered, and cross. "Were you three having a laugh or what?" He said it angrily. "There wasn't a man on the way I went, in fact, I never saw anyone at all, it's too hot to play stupid games, little brats." The three of us were obviously indignant at this slur, as we had all seen and spoken to the same man. Later, when we were in the bedroom with my mom, she asked us about the incident. I still often talk about that day with my mom and cousins. We still have no idea where the strange man could have gone or who he was. I'm bipolar, and, on occasion, the bipolar mania lends itself to strange experiences. I've had my fair share of brushes with high strangeness, like lost time as a child and personal encounters with gray aliens in dreams. What really got me started was a story that my mother told me about a dream. She said she met 3 tall gray aliens in a dream where she woke up on an operating table, with them about to drill into the middle of her forehead. I became obsessed with this and got really into meditation and the concept of projecting, in an effort to make contact with them. I had no idea how deeply this would end up affecting my life. I did eventually contact something during this period. For a week or so, I can only describe my apartment as having an incredibly intense, ominous feeling that something was about to happen. My cat, whom I raised for 18 years, began trying very hard to escape. After communing with them for a few days, on and off, they asked to be let into my house, which they would be able to do if I left the door unlocked overnight, which I did. After this, the house would have more and more odd events. Paintings would fall off the walls, things would fall off shelves unprompted, doors would open on their own, and there'd be vague shapes of shadow people in the night. All of these things were confirmed with other people in the house, including guests. Now, during this time, I was in a very bad way. I spent all my time locked inside, smoking weed, which lends itself to psychosis, and nervously pacing around for hours on end. This reached a head when I had a health crisis in November. I had, and still do have, an unexplained growth on a lymph node, and my blood tests were showing something worrying enough for me to be sent to a cancer specialist in my late 20s. This was a tipping point for my anxiety and the start of my experience. The night after the appointment, a TV in the house wouldn't turn off and had to be fully unplugged. Half awake that night, I heard the incredibly loud sound of a dog barking behind me. My first response was that of incredible terror. My second was to notice that, despite being incredibly loud, my ears didn't hurt or ring, meaning it wasn't a physical noise in my ears. Now, I've been terrified of dogs my entire life, as I've always been relatively frail. The other sounds I heard in the night around that time were a slow and groaning E, a very clear and distinct sue, and a hissing SSSSSSS, all coming from the same place in my room over different days. I've recorded my dreams for 10 years, and these were unlike anything I've ever experienced. I even made sure, after hearing them, to listen for other sounds to verify that they were in my room: mice in the walls, neighbors above me shifting around at night and talking, sounds outside, and none of them were as clear as those sounds. All of these experiences made me hyperventilate in my half-awake state. Now, around this time, I started to come into contact with the synchronicity effect. I'd hear knocking in the house, which would alert me to things in the environment. If I had dirty dishes left out, I'd hear a consistent knocking from around where those dishes were, and it'd remind me to clean them. If I was up pacing late at night, I'd hear an authoritative knocking near me that would scare me into going to sleep. After months of these experiences, I began to feel like something was seriously off. During this time, I was still in a heightened manic state and relatively unmedicated. So, a lot of people, including me, have an internal monologue that narrates our actions. My internal monologue became decoupled. Instead of being my own thoughts, it became like a constant dialogue with something that wasn't myself. Imagine your thoughts as a handwritten diary, with this being like seeing sentences and pages written in another person's handwriting. During this period, I'd mentioned something to this other entity about, say, the futility of writing as a hobby, and one of my favorite books would fall off a shelf as if to signal to me that I should do it anyway. I began referring to these entities as being the fairies at their request. The person living with me at the time is also very into high strangeness things and told me they saw a tall and slender shadow person in the night that looked like one of the aliens I had tried to contact. I took this to mean my conversational partner was one of them. I was told by this conversational partner that they preferred to be called fairies and that this one's specific name was Puck. At first, I was frightened and thought they were some kind of demon or devil. Eventually, in a spontaneous show of friendship, they asked me to throw away razors that I kept for self-harm purposes, and I did, despite being previously afraid of them. What was before individual knocks in the house became an inescapable chorus, like the house itself was singing. Giving them this gift made them very, very happy. I was later introduced to a separate entity in my internal monologue that went by the name Titania, in reference to A Midsummer Night's Dream, as Puck's superior. This entity was witty, funny, and very casually cruel. They showed me some of what they could do, like manipulating coincidences in my life, altering my memory by making me forget things I'd just experienced, and putting me into a very brief but powerful hypnotic daze. Titania asked if I would let them into my body, in what I later realized was akin to a possession, and I agreed under the stipulation that I'd have veto power over anything that they'd want me to do. In return, I'd very casually ask them to make pinky promises with me for whatever I thought they'd agree to give me. During this experience, I didn't realize it, but I was being intentionally love-bombed. I was being praised effusively, while they'd sneak little digs in about things I was self-conscious of that I'd overlooked because of how nice they were. They would force me into unpleasant and even traumatizing situations that have left me with PTSD. One of the more helpful things they did was help me come to terms with repressed trauma from a past abusive relationship, which I was using constant inebriation to cope with. Eventually, I experienced a night where they told me I was responsible for the deaths of many fairies in my life and that an angry faction had wrestled control over me. I'll try to keep it brief, but I suffered 8 hours of pure, intense torture. Everything I had feared was being beamed into my head, images and sensations of my body being gored, visuals of suicide, and the worst violent crimes happening to me. The absolute most horrible was experiencing the sensation of being tortured, akin to a military prisoner, with pliers, tweezers, corkscrews, pocket knives, screwdrivers, etc. The worst of these was wooden chopsticks, plugged into and moved around in your least favorite hole of choice. Unlike a physical body, my spiritual body wouldn't sustain any lasting damage, so I could be attacked this way forever. They told me that my future was to get cancer, have my closest family members die, become homeless and destitute, and commit suicide. Whether this is true, I don't know, but I do know that I can't trust anything that they say. It was as literal an experience of hell as you could possibly get. After the 8 hours, it would happen on and off for months. The most notable change was zapping me with these sensations over the course of weeks whenever I'd have a feeling of passive suicidal thoughts, effectively turning my brain into a Skinner box. I no longer have those thoughts anymore. During this time, I had no choice but to turn to religion. The strange vocalizations I had heard turned into an ask to turn to Jesus. My mother is a pagan and my father was a Christian, so both of these have deeply affected my worldview, and I see them as equally compatible. I began to pray for help days and weeks afterwards and received only brief reprieves from torment. I did receive, however, advice, the most critical of which was just ignore them and they feed on desire. In a dream, I received the name OGM. On researching, it's a Celtic name for the deity Ogmios. I've never heard of this entity before this experience, and the name occurring was spontaneous. It took months of pain and suffering, including a police wellness check once I realized I was in a state of psychosis, but I eventually implemented this advice. Whenever I would talk to them, I'd receive pain and flashbacks to what they put me through. They would obfuscate their identity through guises such as demons, angels, dead angry family members, tulpas, ghosts, etc. I ended up quitting smoking, as it definitely contributed to putting me into psychosis. Every time I would smoke, I'd get Skinner box zapped in the same way. I stopped spending hours of my day nervously pacing. I'm well medicated now, and my relationships with my family and friends have improved considerably. I pray and meditate often, though I don't try to reach out anymore except to Jesus Christ, as a friend and mentor who has my best interest at heart, and to God, as the universal creator of all things. During the experience, the fairy/alien/demon/whatever told me something that I believe to be true above all else. They exist to introduce chaos to our lives. All UFO phenomena have this effect on us. To a fundamentalist Christian who believes in a God of order, this is insanely threatening. For someone like me, the order that I was living in was very stable but very harmful, like a bone that had been broken and healed improperly, with the only solution being painfully breaking it again so it could heal right. This also exists on systemic issues, like with things of government and organized religion as well. This has completely changed the way I see the world. I dislike what happened to me immensely, but it did help me out of a bad spot I was in. I don't think they were trying to help me, as much as they were trying to do as much as possible to extend my torture by making it seem like it was in my best interest. There is no defense against them. There is no way to hide from them. I don't believe in things like deals with the devil or whatever, so my agreement to things like letting them in is perfunctory at best. Something chaotic doesn't care about promises, agreements, or laws. Iron or bread or true names are, unfortunately, pure fiction in my experience. There is no special banishing ritual or magic words that can be said to remove them. I don't believe in things like exorcisms after what I went through. They don't share our value system. They don't enjoy the simple things like hugs or standing in the grass on a sunny day. They are like human people, though, with all the capacity for kindness and ability for cruelty. You can only hope to ignore them until they decide to do something else. This story won't be for everyone, but it's my true, lived experience. I'm still grappling with the fallout of it. If you want to read it as insane bathroom wall scrawling, by all means. I gain nothing from lying to you, though I understand this might be hard to believe. I don't demonize those non-human intelligences, and I think people who believe the inhabitants of UFOs are demons, fairies, gods, angels, etc. are all right in their own measure. They're all of those things and more.